Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 200. It's a celebratory episode, 200 in. That's something pretty cool. That's almost 4 years worth of broadcast live on the Rattlecast. We're back after a week break. We're in the Haiku North America Conference, which is a lot of fun. We'll be having more haiku poets coming up on future broadcasts, but it was fun to talk about the future of poetry there. One of the main aspects that we talked about in our speech was the possibilities that NFTs present into poetry. And for this week's episode, we have an earlier time to make sure we can get the UK contributors here. But we have a whole bunch of contributors for the summer issue of Rattle, number 80, featured, of course, a tribute to NFT Poets. If there's anybody who wonders what NFTs are, I don't think subscribers do at this point. If you're a print subscriber, you read the interview with Sasha Stiles, you read all the contributor notes and all the conversations surrounding it, so you kind of get the idea. But we do have people who listen to the podcast who don't subscribe in print, so just as a little primer, I think we're going to talk about just NFTs in general first, and then we'll get to some examples and share our thoughts and our visions for what the future might be if NFT poetry really takes off as something that can really help poetry and benefit poets. So if you don't know what NFTs are, they are on the blockchain. They are sort of smart contracts that allow people to have permanent records of something. So I've known about blockchain for a long time. I actually, way back in the very beginning, when the first white paper was released in 2008, I was really involved in election integrity with black box voting. And I heard about blockchain there, and I read that white paper. It's only like 3 pages long. And it felt to me like reading like Einstein's paper on general relativity. It was that sort of clean and amazingly beautiful in the way that it solved two problems simultaneously. It's a way for allowing something to be both like transparent and secure. And that's really what it was. So I was thinking about how we could use blockchain to vote. And so we'd have a way to cast our votes in a way that we could see how we actually voted. Everybody could check for themselves. We'd have an actual record that no one could change, because to change something on the blockchain, you'd have to hack like every computer all at once. And nobody can really do that. And so it keeps the whole thing secure by being decentralized. And that's really how a blockchain works. It's like a ledger at the bank or like a ticket tape that shows a string of code, but that code exists forever as long as all the computers in the network are running, and it can't be changed unless all the computers agree on how it's changed. So it makes this permanent record of something. And as it grows and grows, NFTs are one of those things, which is, it stands for non-fungible token. And fungible means that it can be copied. So it's something that can't be copied and replicated. And there's a lot of opportunities for what NFTs can do for poetry, which I didn't think of at all. It was 2008 when I first learned about blockchain, kicking myself ever since then for not getting into Bitcoin. But I was thinking about different things at the time and trying to get a down payment on my house. But fast forward to last year, Katie Dozier, who you're all familiar with if you watch this show, submitted poems to Rattle for Poets Respond. And I noticed in her bio that she had NFT Poetry Gallery as her source. And as always, I'm curious and said, what the heck is that? So I went and visited, checked it out, read her primers on it, and we started talking about NFTs. And she sort of convinced me that there's some real possibilities for what NFTs can do for poetry. So maybe the first person we should talk to is Katie. So I ask you to unmute yourself, Katie. Hey, Katie, how you doing?
Coffee during the Rattlecast, so that's exciting.
It is true. I think coffee would make me too dehydrated, so I have Coke. But enjoy your coffee. And so really, I didn't know. I hadn't thought about. I knew about blockchain. I knew about Bitcoin. You know, I knew it was like too late for me to get. I always worry about government regulation too, but I had no idea that it could be something that could be done to the benefit of poetry. And so how do you see blockchain as helping poets? Can we talk about that first? Like, what can it do for poetry that other forms of publishing and other mediums can't?
Well, I think that as Justin Tagg is going to talk about later, we need to think more about the container that we see poems in. And what NFTs do for poetry is that they make them collectible, like truly collectible for basically the first time. We can reposition how we see poems. And I think it's something that makes it, for the first time, a container that we actually can fit inside.
Yeah. And to me, there's always, I've been trying to solve some problems with poetry for 20 years almost. I've been editor of Rattle for literally 19 years. And for 19 years, there have been a few things that are real issues. And one of them is what I call the Ouroboros problem. And if anyone knows what the Ouroboros is, it's that snake that eats itself. But the issue is that poetry is the grand dialogue of our species. I mean, poetry is how we evolved. We evolved through poetry. We make meaning out of words. That's what we do, creating objects, dividing up the world into tools that we can use. And that's what words are. So they create abstract thought. That was what stored our myths for tens of thousands of years. And so we're all natural poets. We learn poetry. We learn to speak through nursery rhymes. And so poetry is so fundamental to us. And when we start to fall in love with poetry, we start to write poetry too, which is a great thing, because poetry is great for your psyche and your emotional spirit. And it's a kind of meditation, and it makes life better. But the problem with that is, because everybody who reads poetry ends up writing poetry, every consumer of poetry is a producer of poetry. And no matter how many poets you have, no matter how many books you're selling, there isn't a way to make any money off poetry, because there are just as many poets as there are readers of poets, and we can't just sell to each other. So it's sort of like an island that has nothing to export, and we can grow the island and make it bigger and bigger, but we don't have like a boat to get off the island. And so to me, NFTs, one of the things they can do is be a boat by making poems collectible in a way, and also bringing in other people who might be interested in investing in poetry without writing it. And so we talked about making it collectible, and that's what art does. Art, because you make a painting, you only have one painting, that makes people want to collect it, right? And so, but why would people want to collect poems when you can just read them? Which I think is a benefit to NFTs. But talk about that. Why would you want to collect something if you can just read it anyway?
Sure. So that's like the most common criticism of not just NFT poems, but of NFTs in general. Like, oh, I can save this CryptoPunk, so why would I possibly want to invest in it? And it's all the reasons, that people want to invest in artists. I mean, there is, for example, when I collect an NFT poem, I am hoping with a lot of them that down the road, they become worth more. And a lot of the artists, who are in this issue of Rattle, I believe that to be the case for them, because they're hardworking and they're creating meaning in the world with their poems. But a big reason is wanting to support other people doing something that they love and that they're passionate about, and that helps to make the world better. I really believe poetry helps to make the world a better place. And so supporting poets that are doing that in a very easy way through NFT poetry is one way to go ahead and make the world a little better, I think.
Yeah, and I think by we sort of have in poetry, you almost have an attempt at a scarcity economy, right? Because it's books, and you have to go to a library to get a book, or to go to a bookstore and buy a book. But we want our poems shared. And so there's this thing that I've always troubled me, and it's a thing that what drew me to Rattle in the first place over 20 years ago was that we publish all our poems online. We just share everything as widely as possible. Everything is free. Anything that's in Rattle you can read online. Eventually we piecemeal it out because it's kind of more fun that way. But we're not hiding anything or holding anything back. And still people buy back issues. And to me, it's because there's a tangible, tactile thing for reading poems in your hand. But there's also this idea that you want to support what you love, and you want to have a piece of what you love. And that works in the digital world too, I think. And so, but moving it from that scarcity, you can't get this unless you buy it model of poetry, which is what books do, to everybody read this, and if you love it, collect it, is something that could really benefit poetry in a way that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. And one thing that came up at the Haiku conference was, I'm not saying NFTs are going to replace all physical books. Like, I love that I get to hold this in my hand right now. I love that. And there's a place for both things. I mean, imagine, I always like coming back to pretending if Ginsberg had minted Howl and had it on the blockchain, and there was the provenance, you could reach back all the way to the actual original Howl, not to mention the fact that through the benefits of how you can set up smart contracts, then, ancestors of people who wrote the poems can receive the benefit. These are going to be things that are in people's wills, poems, which is really fascinating, I think, too.
Yeah, I think that's really great to think about. Let's go to Justin, also known as Devoid. Are you there, Justin? Yeah, Justin.
I'm here, yeah. Thanks so much for having me, Tim.
Yeah, so I met you. Me and Katie were also at the NFT NYC conference. So we met you, and you just had great things. It was just a really fascinating presentation about the possibilities of NFTs in changing the way we think about books and change the way we think about reading. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, about what how can poetry on NFTs change the way we consume poetry?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I think one thing that happens when a lot of people arrive in the NFT conversation is that they've been kind of the conversation's been saturated with PFPs and with NFTs that are kind of essentially novelty. It's going to make you an awful lot of money, and then suddenly it's gone to zero, and it ignores the fact that NFTs basically it's a technology. So criticisms of NFT in that sense are the equivalent of blaming paper for being able to catch on fire. It's kind of missing the point. So where I come at it is really quite a broad place, which is your story is the operating system for life. It's through storytelling, it's through conversations that we consistently update the software in each other's heads. The models we hold about what reality is and what it is to be human, alive here and now. So stories are very important. And if stories are important, then the manner in which we deliver those stories is also incredibly important. And it tends to be that stories take the shape of the technology that's available to them. So, if you take a loose definition of a book as being a document that is glued together, pages that are glued together, and then you start asking, well, what happens when we make our pages out of code, or what happens when our glue is something dynamic like the blockchain, then you tend to find that stories can take different shapes. So for me, the exciting part about NFTs is that it facilitates a different kind of storytelling, and much of which we still don't know, because it's a quiet thing. It's not all about instantaneously this is the greatest thing ever. It will also be surpassed, but for now, what it's doing is, as you've said, on the one hand, it's allowing us to, take something like poetry and other literature, which is traditionally traded as infinite editions, which means that we tend to fail to capture any value there. And it's allowing us to add an additional economic layer in there, which is the trading of the original text. So that's fantastic. But because NFTs are essentially built on code, you get the opportunity for composable stories, NFTs that talk to one another and can be put together in interesting ways. So it'll be interesting for books as well as poetry. But the thing that arguably excites me most about all of this is that all of our various different media technology has often been built in silos in the past. So one of my backgrounds is in film. So, the film distribution, filmmaking, you want to make a feature film and distribute it, then you've got a very particular set of rails you need to follow to get that film in front of people and on a screen in front of people. The same is true for publishing, the same is true for music, the same is true for games, because we're building everything on different technology. Now, when we can start to have the fundamental underlying infrastructure start to be the same, we take down the walls between these siloed industries and make it really easy for somebody who is also a poet and an artist to put their work together and tell stories that spread out across multiple different media, and also for people who specialize in different media to collaborate in ways which previously might just have been logistically awkward to do. So it's the potential for the kinds of stories we can tell when our technology changes shape, I think, that excites me most.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we'll have, they're not here today because Ana Maria Caballero and Sasha Stiles are both going to be guests later in the month for a whole episode. So we didn't want to have them taking up time right now. But they're both working in particular in so many collaborative ways, which we'll be able to see on those episodes. And there's just so much, it's really interesting to be on the ground floor of something that's right starting. And there's only, a few dozen. I don't know how many people are writing, including poetry and what they're doing with NFTs, but it's not many. And we had 100 submissions to this issue or so, 150, I think. But a lot of them were just people like one-off doing things. And there's really this core group of people around that we've gathered here. They're doing a lot of interesting things, but the possibilities are still being figured out. And we're still determining what can be used in this sort of Web3 environment. And I want to talk about this all more too, but I know we should look at poems too. And Pierre Gervois, who is an amazing poet and artist, is here with us, and he's got to go in a little bit. So I want to make sure we get to Pierre first. Hey Pierre, how you doing?
Thank you so much for your kind words, Tim.
Yeah, it's just wonderful. Another poet that we met at NFT NYC at that very interesting Food Masque reading event. But how did you take your art into NFTs? Why did you do that, and what are you doing with it? Can you give an overview, and then we'll look at a few of the pieces that you sent.
I went to NFT out of despair. So I have been doing physical art for 33 years, from 1988 to 2021. And I didn't sold a single piece of my work for 33 years. And I was therefore slightly depressed about myself and the lack of interest of my work. In May 2021, for the first time, I minted one of my pieces that was composed on my computer on the blockchain. And after 1 hour, a collector bought my work. And then my life changed in the second half of 2021. So it was not because I love science or I love technology or I know I'm a computer engineer. It was out of despair, out of economic necessity. So I love the blockchain, not because I understand deeply this technology, which I know nothing about. It is just because it allows me to show my work, to share it with friend and collector, and to make a little bit of money. So that is the reason.
Yeah, and they're really, I mean, they're, so the piece that we published, which people got to see in the issue, but as a still, I'll put up, this is Income 6, and I'll put up so people can actually see on the screen what it actually looks like in the NFT. So can you explain what you were doing here and how this piece in this series came to be?
So my work is exploring class issues and relation of power in our society. I come from a middle-class family, and the dream of my parents was to raise to the upper middle class. So I was extremely conscious of the importance to appear more important than you are, to have a good job with a good social status, so you can show to everybody that you made it. So I was hyper aware of the class issues. And I didn't make it to the upper class because I'm still broke. And so I am investigating the social trajectory between the middle class and the upper middle class. I don't go outside these boundaries. I don't know what it is to be poor because I've never been. So I'm not going to talk about this particular socioeconomic status. I don't know what it is to be rich, so I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to explore the trajectory between the middle class and the upper middle class. And in particular, I always wondered, can we really be friends with people who make more money than us? Is that possible? Seriously, if you meet a friend and you're taking the subway and the friend has a big BMW car, well, can you really be friends with him or her? If your friend has a big Louis Vuitton bag and you just had a supermarket plastic bag, maybe you're going to hate him or her. You'll be jealous, be consumed by jealousy. So I was asking this question, and I wanted to explore different scenarios with different income brackets and income differences between people, and see how it would affect the interpersonal relations of people in a very analytic way, in a very neutral way, how a machine would observe humanity. So that's a very analytical word. And there are 6 series based on 6 different income situations.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And you can feel that voice, which is where the poetry comes in. It is that analytical, detached voice in this piece and the other ones in the series that make it really work. And then combined with the visual, which is, for those just listening, because this is an audio podcast too, of course, it's a GIF, so it's a moving piece of text with a sort of glitch type slide down, like an old television set that's a little out of whack. And so it's sort of moving all the time. The
idea is to fragment the text the same way I have a fragmented identity. I belong somewhere between the middle class and the upper middle class, but I don't really know well any of this class. So my identity as a human being is completely fragmented. And I wanted to show this in a visual manner. And to continue about what Justine was saying, what you were saying, the beauty and the interest of NFTs for poetry, that we can bring additional dimensions. If you want to represent that on a book, it's going to be hard because it's static. Now you can play on words, you can add some glitch, some destruction effect to the word using the video techniques and the NFT. So we're going to be able to explore, to push forward the boundaries of poetry using NFT. And that's one of the great benefits of this technology.
Do you have the piece in front of you so you can read it?
Yes, let me, I don't have it. So I'm just going to find it. Yes, so I just have it. So that is income 6. I would have liked to have friends with a not too different income, plus or minus 20%. The same equally socially valued type of job, the same car category, the same moderately high professional expectations, the same upper middle class type of home in the same relatively affluent neighborhood. So we can have politically correct conversations populated with random smiles.
Yeah, I just love the way that piece, works together on so many levels, and then the humor of it too is just delightful. So I love that voice and where it goes, and that was my favorite one in the series. But it's an excellent series. And the thing about NFTs is that, like we were saying earlier, you can follow the link or the QR code in the issue, and go to Pierre's object page and look through his profile at all these pieces right now. You don't have to collect them to enjoy them. That's sort of the brilliance and the beauty of NFTs. Or you can check it, of course, in the current issue of Rattle.
I'm super proud of being in this issue. That was one of the proudest moments in my life. So thank you, the Rattle, for this publication.
Yeah, really my pleasure. And so I know you have to go in a little bit. Do you want to share another poem too, so we can see what other type things you're doing and how it can relate to this?
Sure. So let me open it. So I would like to share with you a poem that I wrote in 2021. So I created a series of 9 poems called The Inner Life of CryptoPunks. So for those who are not super familiar with crypto, the CryptoPunks, it's a series of 10,000 pixelized characters that were very famous, that are really part of the history of visual arts right now. And I wanted to explore what was the personal life of these imaginary pixelized characters, because of course we don't know, because they're imaginary characters. So I picked a few of them, and I tried to imagine what their life could be. So is it possible to share the screen, Tim, or not?
Can I have CryptoPunk 30, because you sent these, if that's easier?
Yes, I sent 3. So is it possible that you put one on the screen?
Yeah, I have Crypto 30, but we have the other one too. I have all the ones you sent, yeah. So people at home are looking at it. But if you want to see, I can allow you to share screen too. Oops, not share screen. Yeah. So you can share screen now if you want to do it that way.
Okay, so can everybody see the screen?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the piece called CryptoPunk 2, which is the number of the CryptoPunk. My name is Julia. I was born in Moscow, Russia, when my mom served as a cultural attaché at the US Embassy. We moved back to Pikeville, Kentucky, after she was fired from diplomatic service for stealing caviar boxes from the ambassador's office. I remember the taste of caviar from these blue, round tin boxes. She opened a hair salon in Pikeville and never looked back on her life as a civil servant. I have always felt deeply humiliated that she got busted. I sell drugs to survive and reward myself with a caviar box from time to time. I think I'm a good person and I need love. So I was always exploring the themes of social humiliation, social class, on how persons who are placed in different social setting can behave, can see their parents getting socially humiliated, and how it's going to impact them. So that's a theme that is in most of my work. So I don't. Okay, stop sharing.
Yeah, well, that was great. Yeah, it's really fascinating to see what you're doing. Thanks again for joining us. I know you have to go, but if you can come back or stay, let her stick around. But let's move on to let's go to George.
Thank you so much, folks. I'm going to have to go in a few minutes, and I really appreciate it to be with you.
Yeah, it's so cool to see your work. It's one of the most, I think, the best blends of things going on that anyone has. So it's really neat to see and great to talk to you about it. That was Pierre Gervois, of course, with 2 poems one from the current issue of Rattle, and then also a CryptoPunk series. Let's go to George at Odd Writings. Hi, George. George Pastana, I should say. How you doing? And George's camera's not working, but that's all right. So George, we have in the issue of Rattle, has these Palindrome poems, and Dust to Dust is the one. Dust the Tracks, if anyone's familiar with it, if you've already read the issue of Rattle. So George, what is it that you like about poetry? Why do you write poems in this way? And why are you drawn to NFTs? Let's talk about that first.
Well, for writing poems in this way, I've always loved puzzles. And for me, it's a challenge, right? To write something that word by word you can read backwards and forwards and yet still make sense. And so I've tried lots of different types of poetry over the years. Just myself, I've tried selling my own poetry books, and they sell very poorly. Probably because people are like, well, George Tostada, who's this guy? It's not like I have a history of big publications or anything. So I also have a background in software development, and so I started to learn about NFTs when they started to come out, generally in cryptocurrency in general. And so I decided, it might be kind of neat to mix the two, to mix my hobby of writing poems together with some sort of something in the software development field. And so I was doing that, and I realized when messing with NFTs that the way that they're set up, I could sell a poem at a time, as opposed to having one book that has 50 poems and then attempting to sell a book. Because I was looking at my dismal sales, right? Mm-hmm. And I was looking at I spent a year on this book. It's got 60 poems in there. I've sold 3 copies.
Yeah, I imagine poets are all familiar with that.
Yeah, so I imagined, well, what if instead I had 60 NFTs? Perhaps it would be easier for me to sell an individual poem because people might like a particular poem and not another one. And so at first, it was another way for me to try to monetize what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And then as I did that, I was successful. I was able to sell more of those than the actual books. But of course, as I learned more about NFTs over time, I saw the capabilities of collaborating with other people, starting to play with the videos and making videos out of poems and so on. So that's generally how I got into the NFT space. Mm-hmm. And as for the shape of the poem, that was more like a puzzle to me because I love puzzles. So it's a way, again, of mixing in puzzle making with poetry.
Yeah, well, this is just a wonderful poem on its own. And do you want to read Dust to Dust?
Sure. Okay, here we go. This is it. Dust to Dust. Dust the tracks that mouse or men discarded thoughtlessly behind them, left that those of one who cracks the code may hack some clue. A shell's tortoise shambles, a life's conclusion did he rambles. What is false is truth, say disembodied youth, death their honor forever, breath their only sometimes companion. There are ages many struggle to reconcile. Some fear the wages war offers come in coffins, coffers more like. Anyone would ask kings why it is greed bleeds bones, leeching for life on hands feeding poppies by sunlit fields, killing. The dawn crows at cowards. Lie still, lie cowards. At crow's dawn, the killing fields, sunlit by poppies, feeding, hands-on life. For leeching bones bleeds greed. Is it why kings ask, would anyone like more coffins? Income offers. War wages the fear some reconcile the struggle many ages. Their companion sometimes only their breath. Forever honor their death. Youth disembodied say, truth is, fault is what did he rambles. Conclusion, life's a shambles. Tortoise shell's a clue. Some hack may code the cracks. Who? One of those that left them behind, thoughtlessly discarded men, or mouse that tracks the dust.
Yeah, again, that was Dust to Dust from Rattle number 80 by George Pastana, a.k.a. Odd Writings. And George, this is not really an NFT question, but there are only a few poets that I've seen doing palindrome poems. So for those just listening, you might have been able to hear and sense that the poem is read forward and then backward, basically. And it's displayed on the screen kind of like an hourglass, which is always fascinating to me because an hourglass is a kind of palindrome too. As the sand filters, you flip it over and you have the same thing over again. And so what is the process like? It seemed like it, to make it not feel, the language not feel stilted seems very difficult. And the sentences feel true here. So what is your writing process like for coming up with one of these? How much time do you put into a poem like that?
Well, basically, the way that I write these, it's changed over time. And the way that I write them is actually a very good clue as to how to understand them. What I do nowadays, I write maybe 3 or 4 words. I spend about an hour, and I think of 3 or 4 words that semantically make sense forwards and backwards. Right. First off, when I start the poem, I don't know where it's going to go. Okay. All I know is that I have a sense of where I want to start and where I want to end, and where I want to be in the middle. But I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. So every day after I have my coffee, it's kind of like in the liminal space between when I have my coffee in the morning. I'm not quite awake yet, so I've got my unconscious kind of going. So I'll think of 3 or 4 words that they'll work backwards and forwards. I'll write them down. I'll spend no more than an hour doing that. Next day I do the same thing. Next day I do the same thing. So basically, as I'm doing that, as I'm thinking of the next group of words, I think, well, what can work both forwards and backwards while still making sense? And as I'm doing that, I'm thinking about the word's meaning, about the various different ways of interpreting the words. And so what comes out is the poem. The meaning of the poem, I discover it as I'm writing it. And it goes little by little. And so to understand a lot of this stuff, I know if you read it just all at once, it's just hard. It's hard to understand, I think, just like right off the bat. But what you want to do is you should be looking at sections of this poem and compare it to other sections. Like for example, Crow's Dawn. It's at Crow's Dawn, the killing fields sunlit by poppies, feeding, hands-on life. This all feels like it's kind of difficult, but just think of those words that I wrote. It took me 3 or 4 days to come up with that. And so I'm thinking of the killing fields, of course, has a war reference. Sunlit by poppies, you kind of like the color of the fields, you can kind of see them sunlit. Feeding, hands-on life. So the killing fields, hand-on life. So in this sense, the soldiers that are dying, they're kind of like fertilizer, right? They're dying into the ground, but there's life coming out of that. And all of these concepts of death, war, these are things that I think of as I'm coming up with the 3 or 4 words, and I'm thinking of double meanings as well. So right off the bat, like say dust to dust, there's a clear reference there to the biblical thing. You from dust you shall go from dust to dust. It's basically a person's life, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you can interpret that different ways. The original sense, the most immediate sense, I think, would be something about war. And so disembodied youth, you're thinking, people that have died. But there's other ways of being disembodied. Like, for example, you could look at this and you could think of it in terms of drugs. Okay. So dust to dust, think of lines of dust. Okay. It's kind of like sort of a cocaine reference. The sunlit by poppies. Okay. Well, from poppies, you can, you get heroin and there's various things. You can kind of get out of your head and things become illogical. So that's how what you have, what is false is truth. There's this sense that, false is truth and truth is false. So essentially, I tried to write it little by little in such a way such that there are multiple interpretations.
Yeah, well, that's very fascinating. It's such a complicated poem, and one of the poems that's just so fun to read over and over again, back and forth. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, George, and definitely stick around. We might have more questions for you in a little bit. Let's go next to Mark Fitzpatrick, who does the cover of this issue. And hey, Mark, how you doing?
I'm wonderful, Tim. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Mark is Cries or Crucifix on Twitter if you want, and he has a great thread if you want to follow him at Crucifix. That's CRY. You're gonna have to spell it, Chris.
Yeah, CRYSPHUS. So it's crypto and Sisyphus jammed together.
Yeah, there you go. And so you have a great thread on how what this project was and how it came to be, making the cover. But talk a little bit about NFTs and how all these things come together in your work.
Sure. Yeah. So I got into crypto in 2017, and I just immediately fell in love with everything about it. It was this wonderful kind of mix of, for the nascent polymath in me, it just scratched a bunch of itches. It's, the economics of it, the societal impact, the technology, all those things just, is endlessly fascinating. So I really kind of, took the pill then, so to speak. But I didn't really get into crypto aside from just, buying a bit and just playing around that way. In parallel, I was working on my art in a more traditional sense, so writing poems, self-publishing books. But, I think I can really relate to Pierre and his despair of like this traditional kind of art path where, you're throwing your creative output against these, this structural edifice of, Amazon and just hoping something happens. So just by circumstance, I found out about NFTs being somewhat still involved in crypto, and I started collecting. So collecting from digital artists and photographers who had these really amazing stories, and got to know many of them on a one-to-one basis, which is very much outside kind of the traditional way one would engage with an artist. Like you might buy a piece at a gallery or buy their book off a shelf, but there's no real relationship there unless, you really go above and beyond to try and, send them an email or something, and then who knows. So the light bulb really turned on for me that as a distribution mechanism, NFTs were just, margin of improvement over anything I had experienced before. So instead of self-publishing on Amazon and hoping someone finds it, people that engage with my art and purchased an NFT, they can still remain anonymous if they want, but on a one-to-one basis, you can stay in contact with that person. So you can, airdrop them more art in the future, and this is in many cases, you'll find that a lot of people in crypto, especially artists, are pretty easily identifiable based on the holdings in their wallet of different art that they collect. And that sends you off down different rabbit holes. But you can start finding them on social media, and then you start to connect with them on a real personal level. So it brings this whole richness of these relationships into the equation that, before I found NFTs in 2021 just wasn't really part and parcel of my artistic life. So that light bulb moment for me really kind of changed my trajectory from, even as George was talking about, like write a bunch of poems, publish a book, see what happens, try that again, to publishing one-off pieces or minting one-off pieces rather, and then just engaging with individual collectors that way.
Mm-hmm.
And then this collection from which the cover came from came through that experience. That's from my first NFT collection.
Yeah, it's really interesting. That's something we haven't mentioned, and I realized that even at the talk that Katie and I gave at the Haiku conference, we sort of skipped over this part because we were trying to cram it into 50 minutes. But one of the beautiful things about NFTs is, you talk about in the poetry world, you talk about how people like me are gatekeepers. That's kind of something that you hear all the time because people are all vying for, for that, climbing up the hierarchy of which poets actually get bought and get invited to readings and become professors. And it's people who decide to publish you or not that make that case. And we're all always backed by some kind of institution too. So there's a sort of big apparatus that's deciding who the poets you've heard of are. And one of the great things NFTs do is they make curating an individual thing. It sort of decentralizes and democratizes that. So if there's somebody who you like their taste, they can have their wallet open. You can look at all the things they've collected and use that as your own art gallery, your own literary magazine to find things that, so it makes the individual be able to do that in a way that's never been able to be done before. And so, Rattle's purpose is to promote the practice of poetry, which we think of as a spiritual practice. And the more we can get more people participating in every way possible, including curating, is something that's really valuable too. So I'm really glad you talked about that. It's one thing I keep forgetting to mention, but it's really so valuable that we can make, everybody becomes their own literary magazine with NFT poetry. Which is something that really opens it up. And if you like somebody, you can follow what they're appreciating. And there's a great way, and it's supporting artists along the way at every level too. But so talk about this artwork you were doing, because this is for a charity project as well. It was done with AI, which is fascinating too. And there's a lot of controversy with the NFT poetry issue and with just NFTs and the future of technology in general. And so what do you think about using AI? How are you doing it responsibly? And what was this project that you're working on that we drew this cover from?
Sure. So the project is called Circles of Liberation. So I'm a longtime Dharma enthusiast, I guess you could say, and a lot of my poetry has revolved around just Buddhist principles, maybe not outwardly spoken, but just trying to dwell in paradox and impermanence and whatnot. But these pieces are essentially a modern take on the Enso, which is a fairly well-known Zen art style of painting these circles, and it's traditionally done. It's this sumi ink, so it's like a black ink wash on rice paper. And that was kind of where the art form got its start, many centuries ago. And it's gone a long way since. Like there's a lot of different unique takes on the Enso art form, but I hadn't seen it done with AI tooling, which is something that I have used for poetry to generate interesting turns of phrase and expound upon that. But I found these image generators were just really wonderful to work with as someone who's not a artistic craftsperson. Like I know what I like and I have an eye for curating art that I enjoy, but I'm not a painter, I'm not a sculptor. So these AI tools really are kind of democratizing for people like myself the ability to realize a creation or a vision that you might have. And so these Zen circles, I took some turns of phrase from various Dharma talks that I've listened to over the years, Buddhist books that I've really enjoyed, and taking these little turns of phrase, like, for example, the cover is called Wave Fixation. So I won't explain it, in a kind of tradition of Zen. It's something to think about for oneself. But I took that phrase and then Enso in watercolor and put it into an AI tool that I use, and it produced all these different, very interesting outputs based on that. And of course, from there, thousands of iterations later, you kind of hone in on, what the vision was, or maybe a surprising turn that the AI kind of takes you down. But ultimately, that was the collection was these micro koans, or these little riddles inputted into AI to get some sort of an output that spoke to Enso as an art form, but also was very modern in that it was going to be on the blockchain and minted, and also using these AI tools. So it was a joy to create. And as you mentioned, these all of the proceeds from the sale of these pieces, which they're about halfway sold now, which is great, are going to suicide prevention charity. So that's a little bit more about the background of the circles.
Yeah, well, just a perfect cover, and it's one of the only ones in the series that's an actual wave, and I like the idea of NFTs coming through as a wave. We also had the Young Poets issue, or anthology, which came with it, has a girl riding a sailboat in the ocean like that. So you kind of feel like that's pushing and propelling people along too. It's just a perfect metaphor and a beautiful image, especially the way that you made the watercolor and the tactile experience of it too come across. It's very clear. Looking at the cover, the way that it works, but it feels, you can't tell the difference between this and an actual watercolor painting if it was a photograph of, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I was trying to keep in mind is that what if someone wanted to take this image and then reproduce it themselves in the real world? What would that experience be like? So when I was making the text prompts and using the tool, I was really amping up the high definition aspects of the text prompts to try and produce images that if you printed them at fairly large scale, they would come out and look like a watercolor painting, which again I think is a nice little tie-in back to the paradoxical nature of just Zen in general. Is you have this machine cranking out these ultimately everything digital art wise is pixel art. So it's a piece of pixel art, yet it is also very traditional, and it's in how it harkens back to that rice paper texture. So if you were to print these out, it has that kind of an impact. So I like that paradox of the machine generating these kind of human feeling pieces. It's kind of a neat tie-in back to the Zen aspect.
Yeah, and it too, like using technology to make art is not anything new. The Renaissance painters, of course, I can't remember what that device is called, but they would look and see, on the thing they were painting, an image of something else, or projected on the wall. I don't know if that's not camera obscura, right? That's something else. But I think they would all these secret techniques they would be using to make their paintings more realistic, and that the public wouldn't know about it. But it was still those technologies that were allowing them to do different things, and that's what they were exploring. So when you're looking at like a great Renaissance painting, it was probably made with one of those secret at the time technological advancements that the public didn't know about, but the artists were sharing and copying. And then the paints too, and all those processes. There's really no, we never get away from technology as artists. I mean, every tool we use is a technology, and so it's another technology. And you can use it for good, and you can use it, for bad too. You can use it as just a plagiarism machine as well. So it's important how you do it. Is that something that you worry about in using AI? That sort of aspect where it's taking other people's art and mixing, combining that, and
Yeah, in a sense. So it's before I really started employing these tools in a serious way. I did a lot of research around it, and I think it ultimately it speaks back to what Justin was saying about blaming paper for being able to catch fire. Kind of has that same aspect, in that if you use it responsibly, like you can put in something very specific into an AI tool, like make me a painting that looks like a Picasso, and then you're essentially narrowing in on one particular artist, and there might be an argument around that. Well, you're just copying. But there's an artist, AI artist, Claire Silver, who has done a lot of thought work around the use of AI and doing it ethically. And I think my take on it is, if the images that are being used by the AI tool are so broad in the tens of thousands, I don't necessarily see it as being that much different than a typical visual artist, just walking through life and having inspirations and things that ultimately end up in their work anyway. Very similar to a poet, like, it's kind of that old phrase of books are made of other books.
mm-hmm.
Is you can, anything, every artist has their inspirations, including an AI art tool. So I think as long as you're not crossing the line into copyright infringement, or you're on the bad side of transformative use, which is how much you're transforming pieces of art to make your own art. Like, is it original enough? And that's kind of what the legal speak for are you breaking copyright or not? I think as long as you're being very mindful of those things, for me, it's game on with AI art. But I would definitely recommend for anyone who's interested in looking at that aspect of it is think through all these different issues and look up Claire Silver. She's done a lot of very deep thought work on this, and I think has some compelling things to say.
Yeah, well, excellent. Yeah, really well put. And thanks for sharing this beautiful piece of art that, it took a lot of time to make too. It's not like you just tap something in and AI spits it out. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. So thanks for sharing that. It's beautiful and a beautiful project too. So if anybody, can collect, there's still other things available, and all the proceeds go to that suicide prevention group that Mark mentioned. So thanks, Mark, and definitely stick around in case anybody have any more questions. I should say, if anybody has any questions for anybody who's talking, please do leave them in the chat windows. I see a few. Someone who came late asked what NFTs are, the actual acronym NFT. Again, it's non-fungible token if you're coming in late. And that means that it's something that can't be changed, basically. It's a way to make something unique within a digital space. So digital things are fungible, but a token on the blockchain like this is non-fungible. So that's the way to think about it, I guess. Let's go next to Johnny Dean Mann, who is a contributor with his GIF The Slow Gods. Number 6, I think, is the one in our issue. But he's also the editor of an NFT poetry or NFT art magazine, The Tickle. So, hey, Johnny, how are you doing today?
Hey there, Tim. And thanks for having us, and also apologies for turning up late.
Oh, no problem at all. We got a lot of people to get to, so it kind of works out perfectly anyway. So tell us about first of all the Tickle, and also how you got into using NFTs as part of what you're doing.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that that was touched on just recently there was this kind of the technology itself being kind of transformative for poets particularly. And I think that a couple of things I've always felt that were important about NFTs, and the first one, I guess, is that it kind of takes away some of the negative connotations of self-publishing. It's a way of self-publishing that has a sort of it has a kind of has a sense of kind of independent kind of publishing in a kind of cool kind of zine kind of scene kind of way, rather than that kind of slightly tragic kind of romance novel that you would get on, Amazon, people self-publishing on Amazon. No offense to any of those writers, of course. But it took away sort of some of the negative connotations of that, which is a really good thing for the kind of legions of writers and poets that haven't been published and that are very talented. Also, it was just this kind of democratic process of people being able to share and sell their art, and the converse to that as well, that people being able to collect art and build a collection of art. Normal people, anyone could do it. And I was never an art collector before, and within maybe 6 months of starting collecting in NFTs, I had 1,000 pieces of artworks, and it was just kind of transformative for me, and it really completely changed my life in several ways. For writers, it's really a game changer, I think. And I'd be interested actually to ask you a question, Tim, about the kind of reception to the NFT issue. Maybe you've covered this already, but did you get any kind of negative reactions to it? Was there a kind of misunderstandings around it?
I don't think, before we did the issue, a few people were like, the NFTs are the devil, and so you are the devil too, cancel my subscription. We had a few, like maybe a half dozen people, right when I announced that we were doing the issue in the first place. And then of subscribers who actually read the issue, I think people are just very interested. Still, some people were saying it's kind of over their head, too complicated. They don't understand it, but it's interesting, and they're, curious that we're curious. And then a lot of people have said, wow, this unlocks some new things. I want to look into it, even though it seems really hard. There's a real big bar to entering into the space too. Setting up a wallet and funding it and connecting it isn't as easy as the things we're used to. It's kind of like the people who were making websites back in the early 90s. There's no simple tools yet for it, but that future is coming, I think. And I think we'll be seeing this more and more as we go. So it's been a whole array of things, but people are mostly interested in this. I think a lot of people said, there were some comments that, the poems in it are just poems, like they're not some weird thing, which is kind of the point though too. It's not really about making poems new, although there's ways that the technology can advance the ways we think about poems and where they exist, but it's more about the way we share poems. And there's just new opportunities, and when you can decentralize the sharing of poems, it creates a whole lot of avenues. And one of them is a magazine like the Tickle. So tell us about the Tickle and how that came to be and what it is too.
Yeah, well, it came from that kind of realization one night that we could do it. We could make a little pamphlet. Initially, it was a very short pamphlet, a few pages. We were just talking about it, a few of us, and we just said, well, why don't we do it? And then we did. And that's the beauty of the kind of NFT technology, is that you can do it. It's very quick, and the reach can be great if you work it right. And it's just that we'd seen by that point, a few months into the scene, a huge array of talented artists and writers. And we just thought that kind of a centralized point of reference for that quality of art would be fantastic, because otherwise you just have to troll Twitter and you have to follow the right people, and it's very confusing for people who have not had any experience in that before. So we just thought, well, zine culture, is a thing that I've always been kind of influenced by. Let's just start one. And we did it. We literally did it overnight and released it the next day. It was like 12 pages. And we put a poem in the very first issue, and we've had a poem in every single issue ever since. And it's been a very strong kind of principle of mine to really push poetry. I think I've sort of grown up in a time where poetry really isn't such a visible part of mainstream culture, whereas I think maybe in the sort of decades in mid 20th century it was a lot more prominent, perhaps. Household names like Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath and people like that would generally, you'd stop someone in the street and they'd probably know who those people were. Mm-hmm. Whereas you wouldn't, if you stop someone in the street now, they might not know who Alice Oswald was, or Mary Oliver. And that's a crying shame, I think. And I think possibly it's very, very early days, but the NFT technology and the kind of scene in the community, in the global nature and the diverse nature of it will be something that could lead to poetry becoming more visible in mainstream culture, which would be an incredible thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. That's what I've been trying to do. And it's just hard. It's easy to sort of get, into the poetry culture, which already exists, but to branch out is always really difficult. And then you have the problem too of the things that aren't really poetry in an interesting way sometimes. And so it's hard to find ways to reach new readers in a lot of cases. Can you explain how the Tickle actually works? So I've been flipping, as you were talking, I was flipping through a few pages of the most recent issue. And as everybody can see, you can go to the tickle.art and look at the issues yourself and consume all of it for free. It's just right on a website. That it functions like a magazine as you're flipping through pages like I am here with all this beautiful art and writing to go along with it. But then people collect it too. And so it's a great way to explain how that works, how we can shift away from a scarcity economy to a sharing and collecting economy, which is just totally different and really foreign to the people who are used to publishing poetry in the way that we're used to, even though we fail so miserably at the scarcity economy of poetry. So why do people collect, and how many people collect these issues?
We try and sort of have one of the founding remits was accessibility. We started on the Tesla. I had a very low bar of entry. You didn't need any money to start it. You could just, wherever you were, as long as you had some form of computer, you could basically start minting and selling artwork, which was not really the case at the time on any other blockchain. So that kind of, the community built up around that kind of principle, and so we felt we had to reflect that in some way. So the founding remit was always free, always accessible at all times. And then what the NFT technology gives you is a way of kind of monetizing the scarcity of not necessarily the magazine itself, but what we started doing after a few months was releasing these subscription tokens. So the actual subscription token was a work of art from a guest artist, and that was a very limited piece. And that, if you bought that token, that work of art, then that would entitle you to a subscription to the magazine, and then you would be sent those. You wouldn't have to do anything at all. We just send them to your wallet every week, or as of now we're monthly, so every month. And so we kind of retain some of that scarcity with those tokens, which are very limited. And once they're gone, they're gone forever. And then we move on to the next one. But also the magazine itself, the first issue was 100 copies. We didn't think they would sell out, and then they sold out quite quickly. And those are worth, a decent amount of TES now these days, but it'll go up hopefully. But yeah, there's the typical magazine publication run. I don't know how many copies the Rattle sells, but we have a few hundred subscribers, and then we release a few for other people to buy, but they're still quite limited, So if you wanted to buy one, and people do see the value of that, they want a piece of that kind of history that's kind of in the process of being made, hopefully. It's like an ongoing narrative of the scene, I think, the Tickle. People can look back on it, and it's just sort of, it's we're cataloging the events of what happened in NFTs not from day one, but kind of pretty much close to it. So it serves that purpose as well. And the website, we have the tickle.art that you mentioned. We have a search function. You can just type in an artist, or you can search each issue, and it will ping you straight to the issue that artist or writer is in. And like you said, it's all for free and it's all available. So yeah, it's an important thing for us, but we also obviously sell enough to keep going with the stuff that has that scarcity value as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think this is a concept that's pretty foreign to people, but will not be foreign very soon. Because judging by the NFT conferences, I know you've been to the NFT London, all the brands are moving into this space. Eventually, everyone's going to have a wallet on their phone. Everything's going to start to be more and more standardized. And then going to Taylor Swift concert, which we saw. We were in Cincinnati for the Haiku conference last week, and Taylor Swift was there. You're going to get an NFT token for that's unique somehow. That's going to be the way it works. It's going to be your ticket. I mean, that's one of the things Ticketmaster is big into the NFT space. But if you love Coca-Cola, they're going to be branding it with NFT tokens too, in ways to make individual connections with their consumers. Is kind of what companies are going to be doing. And so in the process of that, everyone's going to be having these wallets, and then having magazines delivered through wallets is a perfect mechanism for it. And so in a way, it's a wonderful just distribution channel in addition to all the other benefits, I'd say, right?
And it's instant as well, which is fantastic. And there's no mailing costs. There's no, it costs us a few dollars to send out to a few hundred people every month. And it's clearly the future. It's still nascent technology, obviously. There will be ups and downs along the way. But yeah, I'm happy that we got there early, both as publishers and also as a writer and an artist as well. So yeah, and it's a promising technology. But I can also totally understand all of your readers who are a bit like, what, NFTs? Because the publicity around it was horribly negative for the entire history of NFTs, basically. It's only sort of recently started to get a little bit better. Sort of horrendous environmental damage and the energy usage and all the scams and all the get-rich-quick schemes. And it was really unpleasant for a long time, and still is to a certain extent. So I can understand. And also the AI technology Mark was talking about a little bit, and the kind of distaste from people who don't necessarily know much about it, or maybe people who do know about it and disagree with it. I can understand that. I can understand that. And the poem I had an issue is an NFT, and it uses AI as well. So there was I can see why people would see that and think like, oh God, screw Johnny D. Mann, he's an idiot. He's just a charlatan. NFTs, AI. Ugh. But it's a technology, as you mentioned. Technology has influenced all of culture for all of time, and you either kind of fight it or you kind of go with it and just try and see what the future is going to be like. And I've always tried to keep an open mind with these things. And with the poem that was featured, I did a lot of things that kind of went against all the kind of benefits of AI. In a sort of contrary way, the speed and the instantaneous kind of near instantaneous production of photorealistic artwork. I deliberately kind of slowed everything down and made it incredibly difficult for myself as a process, and I think that hopefully there's some extra value in the final result because of that. But yeah, I sympathize with people who hate this stuff, but it is gonna stick around. So it's best to try and figure it out in a creative way. That that's what artists do. They figure out new tools and they work with them and they produce stuff that hasn't been made before. So
Yeah, well, Slow Gods number 6 is on the screen. The actual NFT, which rolls out slowly in a GIF, and I refuse to say GIF, by the way. But so explain what you're doing here, and maybe then after you do that, read the poem for people who are just listening to the podcast version. But this is a GIF that that's moving slowly through images which are AI generated, and so we're getting sort of the poem line by line in big block letters as the GIF. But you have to wait, so there's sort of this like anticipation that's building up as you read it. Is the best way to characterize the experience, I think. And then it's called Slow Gods, and so explain it a little bit more what you're thinking with this and what you were doing.
I guess I'll start just with the basic process. Each Slow Gods poem is based on a Nietzschean aphorism. And so I would take the aphorism and I would input it into a tool called Pseudo-Write, which is an AI tool for writers. It's generally supposed to be used for, you're halfway through a chapter and you put your chapter in or a new plot point or a new character trait or something like that, just to defeat writer's block. But I just saw it as a kind of tool of maybe kind of messing with it a little bit. And so I'd input the aphorism and ask it to rewrite it in a kind of dramatic way or a poetic way or a silly way. And that produced a kind of variety of interesting results. And you kind of pick and choose from the interesting lines and quotes that it comes up with. And then the next stage would be me taking those little bits and pieces and then rewriting them into what would appear to be kind of a more sort of standard poem. And then when that is finished, I take each line and then I enter it into a tool called Midjourney. And then obviously AI produces images instantaneously, but one thing it's not very good at is maintaining a kind of theme of images across several images. So I had maybe 20, 30 lines or something, and you've got to kind of wrangle the tools to create a sort of concise and consistent visual narrative that matches the poem as well. And all of that is contained within this this kind of prison, essentially, of the GIF, which is this fixed kind of time interval animation, essentially. So you just flow down. One of the defining features of the NFT space, I think, is speed. Especially in the early days, the turnaround was just astonishing, and you just had to you felt like you weren't keeping up at all. Obviously, the AI tools, the defining nature of them is speed. And I wanted to just kind of deliberately turn that on its head and make an extremely slow process. These things take me like 3 weeks to make, and lots and lots of iterations. But they're packaged within this container of the GIF, which I think, again, is one of the most kind of interesting things about the NFT scene was the rise of this format, which was dismissed as kind of useless. It's about 30 years old, I think, now. And it's kind of had a really impressive, beautiful kind of renaissance within NFTs specifically, I think, as a really sort of serious way of presenting modern digital art. And so I felt that the container of the GIF was very relevant for that as well. There are all sorts of other things that it references. I'm very fascinated with illuminated manuscripts and how those are created to kind of the function of an illuminated manuscript is essentially to sort of a human striving to represent this kind of sublime incalculability of gods, and so that kind of is what. And stuff I forget to mention when I'm describing these things, but that's generally the gist.
Yeah, well, can you read the poem so people listening can hear it?
Okay. Okay, so yeah, Slow God 6. No strings on me. What a peculiar thing to be free as strings. But let's not focus on that. Come laugh with me, crawling on pointed knees into the world of sleep. No, no, you shouldn't sleep. Sleep is a weak kind of safety. So too dreams, full of anxious mess. Stay awake until the sun sets and keep yourself there. The sun sets under the water for those within. Their wind is flecked with crab dust from the floor of air and end-of-line leaves muffling to the mud of their eventual sky. Gravity is merely tradition, motives unstirred by light or sign, a localized past drying, much as a wilting plant ungreens itself to pieces. It's the shape of done things, strings for you too.
And that was Slow Gods number 6 by Johnny Dean Mann from Rattle number 80. Thanks, Johnny, for sharing that. And I think we're going to... Actually, Justin Tagg has his hand raised, I think. Or is that a clap, Justin?
That is applause.
That is a plus. See, people don't usually use the
Johnny.
icons on Zoom, so I wasn't sure. But yeah, thanks for sharing that, Johnny. And let's go to Dick Westheimer next then. We haven't heard from Dick yet, and he's kind of the perfect poet to round it out because Dick came in as kind of skeptical and curious, I guess you could say. And so Dick, why did you come into this? And you know, because of seeing this on the Rattlecast, everybody knows who watches the show that you've been in a whole bunch of issues and you're always on the open lines. We all love you. And but you heard that we were doing this NFT poetry issue and thought you'd try it out, and you got Katie to help you. Get started, and then you started doing your own work. So what did you think about it, and what was your experience like trying it for the first time?
Well, first I wanted to try it out because I heard, Katie talking about it and you were proposing it. You've had all these tribute issues which have sort of broken new ground. And I thought I'd try to join the community and check it out. Actually, I probably didn't quite understand at the beginning how much of a community it is, because it really has this social network quality to it, that the more you're engaged in it, the more your work gets around, the more people see your work. But yeah, frankly, that was it. Let me close out my screen. I'm distracting myself here. So that was really it. I wanted to try it. I'm what I guess I would call a page poet. I've never written something with a multimedia view of the world in mind. Try to include all the images and I think the breaks and startles that you might get in a visual image inside the poem. But I wanted to experiment with a few poems and see how images might enhance them. And that part of it I really became engaged in, just buried in as I was doing the work. So that's what attracted me to it, is this capacity to combine media with my essentially already written page poems.
Yeah, well, maybe we should take a look at the poem that you did, because your poem is, I think it's the only one here. Maybe Slow Gods had audio too, now that I think about it. Then I didn't click on it. I can't remember. But yours has audio, and we could just play it and enjoy it as it is as an NFT. It's a 1 minute long poem. So why don't you just listen? You won't be able to hear it play through Zoom, but it'll be playing for everybody else at home. So let me just, here is Dick Westheimer's poem for everybody who hasn't gone to the link yet and heard him read it there. Here we go. This is Sometimes a Poem.
Sometimes a poem just wants to go out on the town, draw a pink boa around its neck, sip some gin. Sometimes it wants to show a little skin, flash a bare leg, make the boys swoon, and other times wear its mini pearl hat with its price tag dangling down. And sometimes a poem just wants to lounge around in sweats and fuzzy slippers, pop open a brew or two, speak in few words, listen to its heart beat and maybe yours, its head on your chest, whispering.
Yeah, I mean, it's true that that's just a great poem. Sometimes a Poem by Dick Westheimer, and it was cool to see though the way that you use the images. For those just listening to the podcast version, the poem reveals itself. Oops, I gotta delete it. The poem reveals itself sort of line by line, and then and images from the poem sort of appear on the screen first big, and then filling up the screen as you go. So what was it like to decide to make a video like that, and how you would present the poem that way, how you played it, so to speak?
It was really experimental. It's much like writing and poetry itself, is just experimenting and becoming familiar with the tools that I have on my desktop to see how to bring the poem to life for me. And I just started looking for images and trying to figure. I'm not a a visual artist, but seeing if I could figure out a way to arrange them in such a way that complemented the poem. So I would say that part was very much just the part of being a creative and engaging and embracing the opportunity to bring a different form of creativity to the poetry. But as I said, it sort of started with me searching for the poems, as opposed to me having, as I've heard many other people talk about, sort of a holistic view of how the art would unfold.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting to see you trying new things. And what was your take on the setup process? Is it something that you think, you made this video poem on your own, and you do a lot of technological stuff. You have a website and things like that. You try new things. Is it something that was difficult to make a wallet and connect it to the thing and post it on Object, which is where this was published? Was that something that you think at the moment, like, what do you think the admission price is for a poet who wants to try it? Is it too hard? Is it with the instructions from Katie on her website? Is that enough to learn how to do it, or do you need personal help?
I needed personal help, and I'm not sure. Had there been a compelling, enough of a compelling reason, I'm sure I could have figured it out. But as you said, I'm a pretty, technologically engaged person. I found I've never done a video sort of unfolding thing before and figured out how to do that. So obviously I, had the patience for it. But I find it's very difficult for me to sustain. The wallet crashes sometimes. I have to go back and I forget what it's called when you link things back up together. I find it, I have found it difficult to sort of find a community. I didn't spend a lot of time doing it, but there were sort of no, on all the social media platforms, you can get pretty savvy as to how to build a presence and to find your people in various, Instagram and Facebook, and used to be Twitter. But I found I had difficulty like finding my way, not to people I wanted to be engaged with, but work I wanted to be engaged with. So that part was actually, in some respects, the harder part, to find my way into the world. So I was really glad to hear about, and I now all of a sudden forget the name of the journal. I think it was
Johnny Dean Mann.
Yeah. And I know that folks have talked about that in the past, maybe on your the program you and Katie do on Twitter. But I'll try that. I'll look at Tickle and see if there's a way for me to get inside, not just a curated group, but to find poets or artists that I'm interested in. But so far, I've found the barrier to entry is I want to write poems. I've learned how to submit poems. I've learned how to read. I'm learning how to read poems, which is, part of the process of becoming a poet. Folks, and maybe it's an age thing, only have a certain amount of bandwidth.
No, I know. Believe me, I know that.
So, yeah, and so one of the things I know, somebody on the you might notice that I'm over here engaged in the YouTube chat, is somebody said, well, what happens when Amazon, when it's that kind of platform that is, actually has a universal sort of sense of how the interface works? And I know that you've talked about sometime in the future, blockchain might be that, but it might not. What are existing platforms that this could fit into? And that might be a place where it would become more appealing to me. But right now, I want to write poems. I want to read them in journals. I want to find journals that curate collections of poems that I'm interested in and then submit to them. That's one of the things that's been so wonderful about Rattle for me is that for years, it felt like my reading home. So feeling like it's a writing home is a really powerful attraction to it. And I've not yet found that in any of the sort of the blockchain sorts of things.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true. And I wonder, does anybody have any thoughts? Just raise your hand or like nod if you want to chime in about that question, because that was something that came up in the chat window that was really interesting, and I'm not sure the answer. One thing I did think was that being at NFT NYC, Amazon, as far as I know, was not there, which I think maybe, to me, told me maybe that Amazon is afraid of what this might do to their business model as far as books. But does anybody have any thoughts about that? Katie's raised her hand. I wanted to go to Katie anyway, because she's the only poet we haven't shared poems from. So what do you think, Katie, about Amazon? Is Amazon going to start doing NFTs? And I don't know, what did you think about the fact that they weren't there? Because that I think that was a very telling thing with so many other brands, trying to figure out how to use that for marketing and whatnot.
I'd say huge companies tend to be fair weather friends of crypto, and we are in a bear market, and it is not a cool time to go to your board and be like, hey, let's get deeper into cryptocurrency. I think is a big part of it. But I would ask the question, do you want to buy Bitcoin now, or do you want to have bought Bitcoin 12 years ago? Because that's the kind of situation we're in now. We're early, and I don't want to be the person also that looks in 5 years and like, I could have gotten into NFT poetry. There are like some names that are in art galleries, or that's already happening with Sasha Styles being auctioned by Christie's. You want to get in early and help build the market and help build. Do you want the NFT poetry to be amazing poetry? Then great, pull all your friends in, which is why I wanted to get Dick Westheimer as an NFT poet, because I want to help the quality of NFT poetry go up too. This is not something where we should just arrive and say like, hey, I don't like what's on the menu. Let's change the menu. Let's make the menu better. I'm hungry, obviously. I don't need lunch.
Yeah, it does remind me. I mean, that's the thing. It reminds me of, early on, I used to love listservs, because it was like all these like sort of mind-blowing ideas and conversations that you couldn't have in real life in the 90s. You could have on these like listservs for different things. And, most people had no idea what we're even talking about. Like, oh, it's the internet. There's a server, and you talk to people over the world. If they're in Japan at some university, they still comment, and then you can go back and forth with these ideas. Right. And people are like, what's going on? And then the same thing, I was early on LiveJournal. And back before, that was sort of like the early social media almost, because you'd post your journal. It was before even MySpace, and you would post journaling with like photos and things, and communities developed. And that's where I kind of learned how to do poetry in the first place, is poetry groups on LiveJournal, believe it or not. And in coding too, I learned that way. And so you sort of being early on where nobody knows what they're doing, there's just sort of energy involved in it. And I think that's where we are here, where people who have that energy and want to make something new are exploring it. And so, if it's not for everybody, then that's totally fine. But I think eventually, in the same way that everybody who, once Facebook opened, I remember the LiveJournal sort of groups we had were like, oh God, Facebook, we're not leaving LiveJournal, are we? But then slowly everybody trickled over to to Facebook. And it was sort of like the death of that free spirit that came with that first thing, where there were these weird, groups that covered all sorts of topics you never heard of, and you got to meet these strange people of the world, and now it's sort of like, political posts and cat photos. And so, and so we're at the early edge of that, I think, for sure. And so it is hard to access, and maybe that's a benefit in one strange way.
Yeah. It's an opportunity, because the barriers to entry are higher right now. So that when there are all these reasons not to do something, there's more of a reason, in my opinion, to do something by and large. So the fact that everything is not seamless and easy, once it is seamless and easy, guess what? Everybody's going to be doing it, and you won't be an early adopter, and you have an opportunity, in my opinion, to do that. And I want to talk about submission a little bit too, if that's okay. Because it's something that we haven't covered yet. I think Mark Fitzpatrick did an awesome job talking about community and the ability to, like, so for example, when you mint an NFT chapbook, right? I know I have a wallet address for every single person that collected that chapbook, and I can airdrop them a poem, just because, even if I don't know their name, if they're anonymous. So I just wanted to say that, because it's something I'm really excited about. And then also, one of the absolute best aspects about NFT poetry, and this was why I basically found it, was it's a way to self-curate or publish your own poetry. And that's really poetry that you own. So I don't have to stop myself from sharing a poem on Twitter because I want to wait 2 years to have it not in Rattle, which has a much faster time frame, but for a lot of poetry magazines, I don't want to wait. I want to get my poems out there. And I think that's super important because when poetry journals don't allow you to submit poems that you're sharing on like your personal blog, social media, what they're basically doing is saying, hide your poems, don't put them out there. And that is the antithesis of what we should be doing if we want more people to get into poetry. So NFT poetry is super exciting because I can tweet this poem and then I can mint it. And guess what? Some people might even like it more because they saw it on Twitter. So that's one of the reasons I'm supercharged about it.
Yeah, and that's why in our talk in the Haiku conference about the future of poetry, we included that whole curation, versus publication angle. And we should say, what we're doing as publishers is actually curating poems. We're picking the poems that are worth sharing in our opinion and making them, we're highlighting them and spotlighting them. And so at Rattle, we only accept previously uncurated poems, but you are free to publish them yourself anywhere you want. And it just gives power to people to share poems and make poetry more vibrant, which is all we're really trying to do with Rattle, which is why it just connected so well with Rattle's mission to promote the practice of poetry. We want people to be learning about their lives, exploring the world through language, through the connection that we have to words, which is really deep and historic and powerful and, part of who human beings are. But Kitty, you're the only one who hasn't shared a poem yet. So do you want to share, do you want to do M dash or do you want to share a different poem?
Yeah, I'll share M dash. So M dash is the one in the issue, as Tim just said. And why I think it's interesting is because it's a love poem. It's a poem for Emily Dickinson because I like the idea too about thinking about if Emily Dickinson had been able to put her poems up as NFTs, if she would have made that choice or not. And then also it's in Ars Poetica that directly confronts NFT poetry itself. So it's kind of like reads like a love poem also to NFT poetry and how I feel about it. So this is called M dash. There is an ache inside me that has but space for two, a poem that lives beneath my ribcage, and a little room for you. Yet I cannot know what this old umbrella will do till we stand under the rain, feel this new spray blow through.
Yeah, and that is M dash, and it's written on a photograph that you yourself took inside a mine, and so it's the combination of art and poetry, much like Haiga, which is another thing before we sort of move on. We were at a haiku conference last week talking about this stuff because it fits so well with what haiku poets are doing too. So can you talk a little about that? Maybe read one. Is there one of your crypto coup that you want to share? Maybe the one that was on that slide. And,
sure, I'll share the one that I put into the haiku conference thing. So yeah, so crypto coup basically. You guys who know me know I love haiku, and I also love changing anything into a coup at the end. So cryptocurrency plus haiku equals crypto coup. So this is just like it's a collection I'm doing of trying to show how simply you can put forth poems and still have it work as an NFT. So crypto coup number 8 is just this one that's the 4 seasons, raise and lower bows, string quartet.
Yeah, and so, there's this long tradition of haiga, in haiku, which is the combination of visual art and poetry. And then there's also Haibun. We had a Haibun film festival at the haiku conference, which there were these beautiful little mini documentaries or films where the haiga would be presented in various different ways. I think that the first, that was Dave Bonta, who should be a guest on the Rattlecast at some point. I told him he could be, and then I totally forgot. So he's going to be the guest. We'll talk about that at some point. But there's really interesting ways that you can share through other mediums besides for just the text. One of the things that thinking about NFTs has done for me is think about the way the shape of a page shapes the shape of a poem. Like it's almost like a sonnet is a perfectly centered on a regular piece of paper with a perfect amount of white space around it, and kind of that's why we make poems the size we do and the shape we do. And there's just so many other ways we can present poetry, which is just the music of speech creating meaning. And so, but haiku really worked perfectly with that, and a lot of haiku poets are experimenting with that too. So it was really interesting to see. Yeah. So thanks for sharing those. Let's see. We said we'd be about this amount of time, and we still got to do the open lines, which I'd like to do. Let's see. Were there any other? So there's a question here from John Atkinson, which is something I haven't thought about. So we talked about the energy costs a little bit, and one of the things, one of the things you hear is that cryptocurrency is terrible for the environment. That blockchains just use a lot of electricity and water. And there's the truth is that there's two different kinds of doing a blockchain. There's proof of stake and proof of work. One of them is very energy intensive, which is Bitcoin, and makes it super, super secure. But there is another way that things like Tezos and other blockchains use that are really, it takes a fraction of a percent of the amount of energy that Bitcoin does. So there's that aspect of it. But John Atkinson said, I worry about who will pay the cost of maintaining the blockchain in the future. So is there anybody of who's still here who has any thoughts about that? About there is a thing, there's a way that, if you wrote your there's certain ways that you make files. Like I have certain files which it's terrible to admit, but I still use Quark Express to make Rattle, the actual issues of Rattle. It's this program that like nobody uses anymore because everybody uses InDesign, but I have all the templates there, and it's just so easy to keep doing it the same way. And I'm dreading the day that they stop having updates and it stops working with fonts, which is like, you can see it coming. I have to move over to InDesign and like redo all the templates, but there is this way that we lose the ability to even play some things over time, and the blockchains do require networking to maintain. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? About how stable it really is when you're relying on these networks that have been set up by other people? Does anybody have any thoughts about that? Just raise your hand. Yeah, Mark Fitzpatrick is right there. Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing I would say is that the energy debate is a lot more nuanced than the headlines. So you might see headlines about how Bitcoin, which is of course the primary example of being a proof of work blockchain that takes a lot of energy to keep producing new blocks. There's a lot of different things going on around that for harnessing energy that previously would have gone to waste, where let's say in like a lot of rural areas where they're producing power, but too much that's actually required to run whatever infrastructure is in that area. So there's just a lot of waste of potential energy. So those areas or those power grids can set up Bitcoin mining infrastructure to then harness that wasted energy, which then becomes monetized, and they can use those extra funds for any purpose, hopefully to either upgrade their infrastructure to be more efficient or climate change programs. So there's a lot of since Bitcoin has that, and proof of work blockchains have that economic output of the coins that they're producing being worth something, as long as people agree they're worth something, then there are these economic incentives to actually make use of what previously would have been wasted energy. And so that discussion has a lot more nuance than what the headlines admit to. So I definitely recommend people do their diligence around that a little bit further, but it is something that is important to consider. But I think about blockchains in like 100 years from now, 300 years from now, will the poems we produce today or the art we produce today, it might be stored on the blockchain, but how do we keep these things going, even if they are just net drags on the environment? Let's say they are 300 years from now. I think if there is, I think it's just an evolutionary kind of argument to me, is that if these blockchains are a value add to humanity at large, then in hundreds of years from now, they will still be around. And if they are a net cost to civilization, then they will evolve or they will go away. So, Ethereum is a great example of a chain that went from proof of work to proof of stake. And, they've essentially flipped a switch where overnight it went from one to the other. And instead of consuming the energy, that a small country would, day after day, it went down to, maybe a small data center. Mm-hmm. Like that amount of energy. It was almost mind blowing. So I think it's a very nuanced conversation, but definitely one that's important. And I think evolution will kind of get us to the right place 100 years from now, kind of on that time frame.
Yeah, I mean, it really is well said. And, when people think about like the immortality of something, I always think about the fact that, go read Chaucer, how long it takes to get used to the way people spoke. Eventually we won't even be speaking English. We'll have some other language, and then of course there'll be no paper, and who knows what the future is going to hold anyway. And then eventually the sun is going to become a red giant and consume the earth and spit us out as like a barren wasteland of rock. And, nothing lasts forever. The big crunch or the big chill or whatever is going to happen. So, you got to think about your timeline. And I think blockchain will be around for at least the next, decades. And so how long are we going to be around to appreciate it? But yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for sharing that, Mark. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about, if anybody has any questions on that, and maybe it's just Mark too, is if somebody buys the what you've minted, right? If they're collecting that, what does that mean for copyright? I know everybody here knows the answer to this, but who wants to talk about the way, what it means? What are they actually buying if they're buying and collecting something, a poem that you've written, and what does that mean that can you still publish it in a book, for example? Does anybody want to take that question? Because that's something that came up in the chat a little while ago. Katie, you want that? Katie does not want that. Yeah, anyone? Well, yeah, and so it's the same thing as if you sell someone a copy of your book. That doesn't mean you can't use the poems anyway. The intellectual property is still property. I don't know how it works in every country in the world, but countries usually use the same thing. And we are under the Copyright Act of 1976, which as soon as you create something that's original and new, you own the copyright to that. That's intellectual property. You carve that up and decide what to do with it. The NFT itself that you make is something that's made and can be sold in the same way a print of a painting is, but you still own the painting. You still own the right to that thought or that book or that collection. And so you can still make books, as Katie did. She minted her watering can chapbook with Alexandria Labs, which is a collectible NFT. I think there are 25 copies, if I remember right. Most of those are sold. But then she went ahead and made her own chapbook version of that. And you can still do that. There's a whole bunch of ways you can go about. AI copyright, as Johnny Dean Mann is messaging us, is a very interesting aspect of it too. A lot of it is complicated. There are a lot of gray areas in the world because the law doesn't keep pace with technology. So it took a long time for fair use to shake out. In a lot of ways, it still hasn't. With like the way Shepard Fairey uses repurposed images, was using Facebook, just posting Facebook picture or Instagram pictures, I should say, and then recontextualizing them and calling it art. And then a judge has to decide because there are gray areas all over the place. There are a lot of really fascinating angles, which we of course can't cover today. Last call if anybody has any questions. Let's see. So I think we've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully everybody has enjoyed poetry. Is there anything anyone else wants to say? Katie is raising her hand. Katie, what do you want to say?
Hi, I wanted to say there was a question I noted in the YouTube chat earlier that I thought we should answer if we have a minute.
Yeah.
And I wrote it in horrible handwriting, so hopefully I'm able to read. But Emily asked, does the value of an NFT depend upon how many times it can be bought? And I thought that was a really good question. So there are different ways with an NFT. So you can create what's called a one of one, which is like George Pastana's poem, Odd Writings poem that he read, which I know because I own it because I bought that poem. And so that's a one of one. So there's only one of those that exists, which means I own the only one. But then something that happens a lot is like with my poem that's in the issue, I made 100 of those. So there are 100 editions of that. And so I priced that a lot lower than if there was only one of those. And then a further question, which may have been what Emily was actually referring to, is so I can take George's poem that I own and I can put it for sale, which I'm not going to do yet. But I could put it for sale at a much higher price, obviously, because I got a really good deal on it. So I could put it at a much higher price. And then what happens is that, guess what? Some of that goes back to George, to the poet, as it completely should, which is one of the most exciting aspects about NFTs in general, not even just with NFT poetry. So great question, Emily.
Yeah, it's a great point. And that's where it becomes the one thing that because I've done this too. I could show, let me just go over it really quickly. We really got to go to open lines, but we'll go to my profile on Tezos. And so I've minted a few poems myself. Mostly haiku or haiga because it's like visual haiku too. But you can see here, there's me. And then there's some stuff that I've minted, stuff that, I've listed things. One-on-ones I don't expect to sell at all. I listed it for like $250. But for some high guy, I've made 5 copies of it and listed 5, minted 5, and I'm selling them for 5 Tez each, which is like $4 now at this point. And a bunch of those have sold, and it's just a fun thing to do. And nobody knows yet how to go about this, which goes back to what we were talking about before. It's the early days of this technology and using it for sharing writing. Nobody knows what they're doing or what the best way to go about it is. You can look at who's successful, and Sasha Stiles is probably the most successful, building a massive audience through networking and doing collaborations with art galleries and visual artists that already have a presence. And the Verse is something, a shout out to that. Both the two poets, Anna Maria Caballero and Sasha Stiles, that we'll have on for their own shows, are working with the Verse, which is something that works on this. And onboarding poets like Denise Duhamel, who today's poet is, also did an NFT poem with the Verse, as did some other poets we've worked with. So there's just a lot of ways, and nobody knows what they're doing yet, and that's kind of the fun. Everyone just throwing stuff around, seeing what works, seeing what makes it a better way to share poems, and seeing what the possibilities are. Right?
That's a really great point. Just like, when Johnny D. Mann started the Tickle, now I think it's been 2 years. Like, there wasn't a model, I think, that he was following for doing it. He just got out there and started creating. And that's part of why I love this community so much, is it is full of people who want to be innovative and who are thinking about how to expand poetry, which is something that even for people who are still skeptical about NFTs, if you don't think NFTs are the answer for poetry, like I clearly obsessively do, then what do you think the answer is to make poetry more and more mainstream, or get it into the collective consciousness on a bigger level? Because I want that answer too.
Yeah. And really well said. And I know you're going to stick around for the open lines, and Dick is too, but anybody else is also welcome. And I will say too, before we go on to the open lines, that for Rattle, somebody asked what Rattle's doing if we're going to do another NFT issue. And no, we never repeat our themes. We have thousands of things we want to do in the future. But I am thinking about ways that I can incorporate this technology to share poetry with more people. One of the things I'm thinking about doing, we had ebooks with Amazon for a long time, but I hate working with Amazon. And so I'm thinking about trying to work with Alexandria Labs, and we've talked about it a little bit, to have a way to distribute Rattle as an ebook in a better way than Amazon. And one of the real big problems lately, since the pandemic, international shipping has been ridiculous. So there's certain countries that get their copies, but like if you're in India, or if you're in Indonesia, if you're in Australia, it's like 50-50 if the magazine ever reaches you. So I think I'm making NFTs token gated, maybe in a way for international subscribers to get their subscriptions instead of having to rely on the mail and shipping the things around the world. I'm not sure exactly what we're going to do, but we're still, we're trying to make connections and seeing what we can, because our purpose is to share poetry and promote the practice of poetry, which we think the whole world is a better place if more and more people are doing it for so many reasons. And so that's what the future holds. We're not doing an NFT poetry issue, but we might work in different ways, making NFTs and tying them to artists and who knows what. So any way that seems like it's going to work for us. This was an experiment doing this issue, and we learned a lot, and we're going to keep experimenting like we always do. So thanks to everybody for joining us today. I was really, sorry if we didn't get back to you, but it was just great talking to you and having you on for a bit and getting to share your perspective on NFTs. Hope this experience with this issue was a positive one, and hope a whole lot of people learn about it, because it's something that a lot of people don't know very much about. So thank you for being here and for doing and exploring all that you do. Now we're going to go on to the open lines, and let me put this on the screen so you can see how it works. So it is a little late for open lines. We only have about 45 minutes at the very, very most, so it's definitely going to be one poem each today. But if you'd like to share a poem, email it right now to OpenMic, that's openmic @rattle.com. And then find the Zoom link and join all these fine people, whoever's able to stay for the Zoom link. I'm going to paste it in the chat windows on Facebook and YouTube. Email your poem to me at openmic @rattle.com. Then follow this link. Only if you want to share poems. We're going to keep streaming on YouTube and Facebook. But if you want to share a poem, email it there and follow the Zoom link and share it. And I will... I have lost my YouTube stream. Where did we go? I think I accidentally X'd out of it. Hang on. Let me find it. How did I do that? Let's see. Live. Am I still live on here? Okay. Well, anyway, we'll figure that out, and you can join us on YouTube. Where did I go? Okay, I found it. Okay, anyway, we're going to take a quick break. I'll be right back with the open lines. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. The prompt last week was to, where did I go? That's not. Oh, that's the problem. Okay. The prompt for last week was to write an ode to an object in the room you're sitting in right now. And so I tried to write a poem. I was at the on a plane while I was trying to write, and tried to write about an object on the plane. And this poem is one of those things. So I judge poems, the quality of the poem, based on how much it surprised me and how much it came to some kind of new thing. Because so often, if you learn how to do this poem thing, you kind of get into this meditative zone where something new emerges that you're surprised by, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that connection. And that's how I judge the quality of poems. This did not work. It did not work at all. But in the interest of sharing things that even when they don't work, this is my ode to the no smoking sign on commercial airliners. So when I flew out to Cincinnati, we had the regular no smoking sign, which I've seen every single time I've flown an airplane my entire life, always illuminated. This time, that sign was gone for the first time. I always wondered how long, because nobody's going to smoke. Like, when's the last time you saw someone smoking? But always those signs are lit. And on the new Airbus, like whatever it is, A416 or whatever the heck I was on, no more no smoking signs. There's just a few around and not lit up. Instead, they have something different. So this is my ode to the no smoking sign on commercial airliners. And let me zoom back a little bit. There we go. Ode to the no smoking sign on commercial airliners. No one was smoking. No one had been smoking for some time. Oops, here, let me see the video too. Let me start over. There you go, there's me. Ode to the no smoking sign on commercial airliners. No one was smoking. No one had been smoking for some time, and still you glowed over all our domestic flights, 2 by 2 in a line, row by row, over the old man nodding and flinching half asleep, over the infant's cantankerous cry, your crimson knot, a kind of halo, a knot of unblinking illumination, a badge of bloom in the edge of the eye. Fasten your seatbelts, we were told with a ding, but you were the thing always on. You said no one would fly without smoking, but now it's July, the airplane is full, and you've flown off, skimming the clouds like frozen smoke, no longer needed. In your place, a new sign for new vices. Please turn off your electronic devices. See, that's just kind of too on the nose. Yeah. Anyway, that was my poem. Didn't really go anywhere, or anywhere unexpected anyway. So if I was doing the critique of the week, I would say find something better. But anyway, what would you like to share? And let's not go to the poets who have been on already so far. Let's go to the new open liners, but we'll come back if we have time, of course, to everybody. And let's go to Laura Daniels first. And I think Laura Daniels has been on once before, maybe. Hey, Laura.
Yes, we did a critique.
That's right. Yeah, that's the name for it. Okay, well, great. Thanks so much for joining us.
And then you had sent. Oh, I'm sorry. Go on.
Oh no, go ahead. What?
I had sent this poem in as a Poetic response, and you had sent back encouraging me to come on the open mic. So
yes,
I said, "Oh,
yeah. So glad you're here. So what was the response? This is a prompt poem, well, what was the inspiration for this poem? Let's say that.
The inspiration was in response to North Carolina is passed a bill that was going to start on July 1st to limit abortions to the first 12 weeks, which is,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a lot of protests back and forth to try to stop it from being put into law on the 1st of July.
Yeah, well, great. Well, let's hear it. And also inspired by Jimmy Sentio Bacchus, Who Understands Me, a poet. If you're curious, we interviewed him in Rattle, I don't know, 60 maybe, so go back and look. But he's a fascinating person. One of the most interesting interviews we've ever had.
In the 1960s?
No, I mean in issue number 60. So it was
okay.
like maybe 3-4 years ago. Yeah,
okay.
Because he was because he learned poetry and really reading in prison. And so it's just such a fascinating and empowering story that he had to share. But anyway, let's hear this poem, Laura.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is it's entitled Question Authority, and like Tim said, it's inspired by Jimmy Santiago Bacchus, Who Understands Me But Me. They wanted quiet, meek, and mild, but I was loud and clear. They said to hold all questions, but I raised my hand, wanting to know. They said to sit down in the back, but I stood my ground up front. They denied my body's freedom, and I fought for what was mine alone. They denied me dignity and respect, but I will earn it in the end. I won't keep quiet, never could, never will. I question your authority, your knowledge. I stand with others who rise in protest. I fight for a woman's right to choose. Who understands my fight but me? I want to live a beautiful, dignified life. Who understands me when I say this is beautiful?
Excellent. Thanks so much. Yeah, that was Question Authority by Laura Daniels, something I always do. Thanks for sharing that, Laura. And let's go next to Brian O'Sullivan.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Brian. How you doing?
I'm doing really good. It was really fun to listen to. Thanks to all the NFT poets. That was great.
Yeah, so what do you have to share with us?
Okay, so I have a prompt-ish kind of poem. It is not to an object that was in the room, but to a person that was in the room.
All right.
But it's ode-ish. It's an anniversary poem, actually.
Oh, perfect.
So it's called Our Cats and Other Essentials. After Major Jackson's superfluities, to Jen for our 22nd anniversary. This walk to Sugar Mom's as we fall behind the group. This feta chicken, that cab I don't call. This shambling mound wherever he is. This bumpy bus, this Tom through the window, this nanny, this Flora, this hissing Milesy. This bell with a crack, this champagne cork, this General's Inn, this dress and tiara, that noisy train, this turtle soup, this icy windshield, this stone cat, this Romanian choir, this voodoo bowl, this blessing of cat boats, this Fergs, this Josie, this imaginary river with real kayaks on it, this place of grace, those hospital rooms, this shooting star, this Bryson, this treehouse, this Yule Cat Hugo, this Des in the room, this Des on the move, this resting and roaming, this quiet wildlife, this love, this love, this love, this love, this love.
Ah, that's beautiful, touching. Our Cats and Other Essentials by Brian O'Sullivan. And Jen, of course, was on in the last episode. So if anyone wants to see Jen, go back to Rattle number 199, and she is there on the open lines too. Very cool to see. Thanks for sharing that, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, and next we have let's go to Emily DeFerrari.
Hi. Hi.
Hey, Emily. Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I am so impressed I'm actually here and I'm not getting feedback. I was listening to that NFT thinking I'll never be able to do that. I can't even get over to the Zoom on the
well, as long as you close where you were, then there's no feedback. That's one thing I forget to mention. So if you're sharing a poem, and I should say this for anybody who's still waiting to share on the Zoom, close out of wherever you were listening, either YouTube or Facebook, just X out of that, or at least mute it so that you're only hearing through Zoom, because there's like a 15-second delay, which is always a problem. And I keep forgetting to say that. I should say that every single episode, but I don't. But anyway, Emily, what do you have to share with us today?
I I'm sharing a poem that got published recently. I don't often have published poems.
Mm-hmm.
This was published in an online journal called Intima, a medical narrative journal.
Oh, very cool. Congratulations on that.
Thanks. And it's something I had been writing for about a year because I've been doing abortion support work.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up feeling like the ekphrastic challenge kind of spoke to this poem. So it was kind of a reverse.
Oh, really
for
interesting.
me,
Yeah.
the most recent one. So I'll go ahead and read it.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to clear my throat
Okay.
without moving. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. The Secret Keeper. He was a night shift doc on labor and delivery. She was a later mama wannabe, a nurse, green. He told her he'd had a vasectomy. She started finding bobby pins in his bathroom. The control stayed pink, but the test turned blue. She made an appointment. Her friend called that morning to say she was sorry, but she couldn't drive her or pick her up. You have to take a cab home, her friend said. Promise me you'll take a cab. She tucked 2 subway tokens into her bra and told her friend, for sure, she would take a cab. Lying flat on her back, legs in stirrups, memorizing the hypercolors of a New York City cartoon map loose by one tack in the acoustic ceiling, she heard the exam room door open. Her eyes swallowed the room as his voice stumbled over her intake papers. I pulled her knee socks down around her ankles. The elastic was cutting the circulation. She pulled them back into place. When he sat between them, she lifted to one elbow. He didn't look up. She fell back with a crinkle and a tear of the white paper. She held the napkin-like blanket over her thighs. She wanted weight. His instruments entered her without his usual reassuring narration. She stared hard at the map on the ceiling. Let him do it and keep it to himself. In the recovery room, linked to the quiet of other women, I saw her feel for the remaining subway token in her bra. When I brought her tomato juice and crackers, she called me knee sock nurse and thanked me. I handed her the form to sign that she was going home accompanied. She scratched an untrue X with so much force she tore the paper, pushed out her lower jaw and held it there, took the subway home and kept that secret like all the others she had made that day. She didn't expect that I'd recognize her when we met, both gray, working hospice, but she greeted me, asking if I were still pulling knee socks down.
Oh, that's great. Excellent poem. Thanks so much for sharing that. Very powerful story, The Secret Keeper by Emily D. Ferrari. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks.
Yeah, and next let's go to... Oh, by the way, Johnny Dude Man on the chat says that Zoom was harder to learn than NFTs. And Katie Dozier agrees, as she came to NFTs first. And, Zoom is kind of tricky. It's amazing what we can learn. It's a great point. Because before, I used to have these detailed instructions for how to join and participate for every single guest. And then as soon as the pandemic came, out of necessity, we all learned things. And everybody I don't even tell people. I just say, show up to the Zoom. And everybody knows because everybody's familiar with it at this point. So a really good point. Let's go to Dick Westheimer because he said he had to leave. And I think, can we get you, Dick? Is there time?
Yeah, I'll read a short one.
Okay. Should I pull it up where?
Yeah. It's the etching of ancient stone and flesh,
okay,
which was a Poets Respond poem.
Okay, as I pull it up, explain what it was about.
Very briefly, somebody was caught on video etching his little heart and name of himself and let's see, I think Ivan Hearts Haley in 23 onto the wall of the Roman Colosseum.
Oh, wow.
And a random passerby caught him doing it, and it got on social media. And of course, that's a no-no. Punishable,
so.
Not by death, but by prison and time. So I just thought about what we etch our love into.
Yeah, great point. Okay, go ahead.
The etching of ancient stone and flesh. There is a certain impulse that prompts the etching of names into the bark of beeches. The tree accepts this without much complaint, yields to the mark of a suitor, inscribing the shape of love into the gray hide of this living thing. Ancient stone is more resistant, prefers slow eroding, the work of water and ice, to the scrape and pain of a stylus dug into its gritty facade. And a lover, the marks might be hard to note. Sometimes they're seen in a brow that becomes so knotted that it never comes undone. Sometimes they're a gash so deep that flesh never grows back. There is no scar, only ceaseless oozing. And sometimes the mark is made light as a caress in the name of one's love, warm as breath on the concave of a hip, a tongue-wetted neck, a yearning kiss that burns for the whole day.
Beautiful poem. Yeah, excellent and great story to write about too. Thanks, Dick. And thanks too for having us out to the farm last week while we were, you're in about a half an hour outside of Cincinnati. Invite us over for literally, it would be the best pizza I have had in my life until I die. And then maybe in the afterlife, there'll be better pizza. I don't know.
Well, maybe you'll have to come back and I'll make a better one as I get better at making pizza.
I don't know if that's possible. I mean, it was pretty good, but it's just great to see, your farm and family and meet everybody. Thanks for having us out.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
Yep,
See y'all. Bye.
It was Dick Westheimer with The Etching of Stone and Flesh. Let's go to Deb Tannenbaum next.
Hello.
Hey, Deb, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I think you guys were amazing with that episode. I actually feel like I understand it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's
pretty close
like
now.
It's a leap, but if we can build that bridge, then it's not a leap anymore, right? So
that's right. And the poetry was great.
Oh yeah.
So I did this poem for Critique of the Week, and I got a lot of feedback, and so I just thought it'd be fun to share its current version, which I don't know if it's final or not.
Oh, great. Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. You suggested shade. Up through the glare of sun-drunk air, rocks poke underfoot. The eroded steep trail eases, settles in a way soft with pine needles. Trees are poetry, most are lodgepole. The pine-scented breeze is poetry sighing. Half the trees stand dead on their feet, insect-wrecked casualties, gone rusty, ragged. Yonder, twin alpine lakes, rainbows swim. Descent is slow, foraging for mushrooms as we go.
Oh, that's great. Definitely. I love what you did with it after. I remember that poem from the workshops, and we suggested to condense it down and make it more visual than narrative, and it really works. I love that little haiku hidden in the poem, too. That's really neat. Thanks for sharing that, Deb.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yep. Take care. There was Deb Tannenbaum with You Suggested Shade. And now we'll go to Zachary Honeycutt.
Hey, Tim. How's it going, man?
Good. How you doing today, Zach?
I'm doing great, but I'm super aggravated now because I really wanted to see you guys today, or have you see me, I should say, but Zoom seems to be having a mind of its own today, so I can't, I don't know what's wrong with my camera. I can't be on screen.
Well, it's all right. We have you here, and it's a good lesson in the fact there's a kind of bias where when we're struggling with something new, we notice all the problems, but when we're kind of used to it, we're like, well, but so this happens with Zoom all the time. It happens with our live streams. There are glitches and problems with technology. And so thanks for highlighting that in a strange way. But what do you have that you'd like to share?
It fit in with this episode, so there you go.
It did. It was like we set that up that way.
Well, okay, I have a very special poem to read today. It's actually free verse, believe it or not, shockingly.
Wow. That is shocking. I count on you for our for our form.
And I was gonna read this right after Father's Day, but we could only do one poem that day, so I saved it. But this is a very special tribute I'd like to do for my dad, and this is the poem that I was gonna read on Father's Day. Really quick, just to say something about it. I was actually abused when I was a kid, and when I was 16, I left my mom to live with my father, and my father and I have always been really, really close, and my father, like I hate how when I was a kid growing up as a millennial, like a lot of the cartoons, like for instance, the Fairly Odd Parents or Jimmy Neutron and cartoons like that, they'd always make the dads look out to be like complete ignoramuses or imbeciles that couldn't do anything. And even like in the old shows, like The Honeymooners, I remember there was an episode with Ralph Cramden where Ralph and Alice had to switch places, and Alice was, working and making the bacon, and Ralph couldn't even boil water. He tried to cook like something for dinner and everything like blew up in his face. So my dad was the complete opposite of the stereotype of what I guess men are supposed to be. My dad was kind of like Mr. Mom, and he also worked, well past 9 to 5. My dad's a remodeling contractor, so he's probably like the hardest working person I knew and very smart. So this is what I wrote about it. I sent it to the Rattle poetry competition like a couple of years ago, but this is what I said about it. I said, Tim says to send us a poem that makes us cry. This is the one, unless you're the Grinch, before he converted. I wrote it early in the morning on my phone when I was thinking about my mom, and to this day, when I read it by myself, sometimes it makes me cry. There's no fox feet or shadow here to protect me or any other character that I can hide behind. It's just my raw emotions about a complicated, for me, issue. The poem is about duality, as many of my poems and writing are in general. It's about good and evil and how the titular mother in the poem is both one very bad mother and simultaneously one very good mother. And I think that's saying something because the word mother can mean something different to every person based on their own experiences, whether good or bad. A mother doesn't have to be your stereotypical picture of a nurturing, caring, compassionate woman. It could be, but it could also be a single father who comes home every night covered in dirt and drywall dust or sawdust and paint. And that's what a mother always was for me.
Yeah.
So this is the poem.
Yeah, excellent
Mother.
statement. And being a Rattle poetry by submission, I guess I wouldn't have read that because we only read the poems. But that was great. Yeah, go ahead, read Mother.
Yeah, no, definitely. So here's my mother, and I guess it's good you guys can't see me because if I do tear up, I'm hidden behind this black screen here, so that's a plus.
Okay.
Mother, you were there when I began, both as a child and as a man, holding out an outstretched hand as you walked the walk before me. You taught me to have faith in Christ, and because of our relationship, I comprehend another sliver of the peace of the Father's mind, how he holds the capacity to love his sons unconditionally, no matter what they think or say or do. You laid out your tools more than 1,000 times upon the dusty, dingy floor, and poured out your sweat and your time and your toil to show me what real love is by your actions. That outstretched hand is layered with cracks, like the maze of lines in the cracked porcelain tile of the tub you took out on that last job. Your fingers, each finger, is bent, broken, burnt, or bruised, as that hand still reaches out for me, sort of hanging lifelessly, but still sticking out anyway. You trudge upon that path you know, on your hands and knees, so that your knees are worn down like the stumps of trees, and gnarled and knobby, full of bumps and uneven. And I can see the rings of your time spent, wrapped around you, never wasting a single oval, never wearing a wrinkle you did not make the best of. When I fell and cut myself or bruised my skin, you picked me up in those sacrificial hands to wrap them around my waist and hug me. You cleaned out the dirt and bandaged my wounds and took them up, carrying them as if they were your own. When Mother pulled upon my arm and almost ripped it off my shoulder, when Mother got me so sick that the doctors laid my limp body upon a cold metal table and shot up my little legs with penicillin as I screamed in pain. When Mother mocked me and let others ridicule me until I cried. When Mother drove me around town half smockered at 1 a.m. When I looked for her and could not find her. When I looked for her for at least 2 days and found her in the bed of another man and woman. When mother did not tuck me in, and I looked out through the window at all the stars, wondering if you could see them from your porch. When she took the phone and locked it in her room so I couldn't call you. When she smiled snarkishly, expecting to be worshipped on Mother's Day. For giving birth to me, then shoving me forward into a hellish existence. When mother ripped my entire world out from under me, as if the entire life I knew were all one big joke she played on me. You were there, going through it all with me. Your big hand clasped around my growing fingers. You lifted me up and showed me a better way to live. When my mother abandoned me and gave up her right to watching me grow, you earnestly and vigorously put on her pristine shoes, squeezing your toes into the ends of the heels, wearing them on top of your ratty, mud-stained sneakers, making them fit as best you could, then going off to labor yet another day.
Yeah, beautiful poem, Zachary. Thanks so much for sharing that. Really powerful. That was Mother by Zachary Honeycutt. And great reading too. And you can hear the power of the iambics, even the free verse, I have to say. But really touching poem. Thanks for sharing it, Zach.
Yeah, always a pleasure. I consider you guys my poetry family, so I guess for the 200th episode, I wanted to do something special like that.
Yeah, that's perfect. Well, thanks so much, Zach.
Yeah, see you guys next time.
Yep. So Zachary Honeycutt once again with Mother. And let's go, we have a few more people, and also it will swing back to some of the NFT poets too, if there's time. Let's go to Spartacos, who is, for once, it's not so late in Greece. How you doing, Spartacos?
Hello. Yeah, I'm doing well. Nice to hear from you, and a really interesting conversation tonight. I learned a lot, and, poetry is not something like a static thing. It evolves, and I like that you embrace, new sort of poetry and art. I think that's something great, and I appreciate a lot.
Very cool. Well, thanks. Well, what do you have to share with us today?
Right. I was a bit sick tonight. So I tried to write an ode about my new step stool. So I couldn't think anything. So I guess I did a sort of a reserve poem, but I used the reviews from the buying site. I don't know if that's valid, but this is what
It's all valid. We just want people to write poems. That's all it's about. So let's hear it.
Okay. Ode to my new step stool. Oh, new step stool, your perfect design can make it easy hanging a curtain. I hold you in my hand like a wine, and your stability is certain. You offer reassuring support to elevate my body to ice. Your value is my last resort. You make me happy with your price. I was initially uncertain. I did a lot of fast research. You are the safer recent search for me that doesn't want a burden. The moment I reach the ceiling and use your large non-slip thread, the cabinets become revealing with your instructions unread. I believe in you even after I had a natural disaster.
That's great. Yeah, excellent poem. Thanks so much for sharing that, Spartacus. Ode to my new step stool. A fun one. Yeah, appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye. It was Spartacus Anagnosterus with Ode to my new step stool. We have a few first-time callers still. Mark Freiberg is here. I think Mark's a first-timer.
I'm in a car. Can you all hear me?
We can. How you doing, Mark?
Great. Let me see if I can get video up here. I'm not driving. My wife is, so bear with me.
Okay.
And I'm going to do start video, and then I'm going to switch pages here so I can actually find a script elsewhere on my iPhone. Okay. How's that? Everything good?
Yeah, everything's good. Where are you driving? Where are you?
Well, we're heading into Daleville, Virginia. Recently moved back to where my wife grew up and I love after a long trip to my friggin' 33 years, but the Blue Ridge always beckoned, so you're back. And since it seems you could open mic for anything, I'm just going to read my favorite poem. It's about something that used to be in my house. I call it Smith Corona Requiem.
Interesting.
I first said goodbye, unforgiven for letting you go, from my hunched shoulders slumped back, the tap-tap on kitchen table, coffee shop counter, my lap. From high school graduation to the final resume, you ask no more than a few drops of oil in a clamshell case. I threw you away, disgrace. Casually sent to a landfill grave, there rests my scarred, hard-nosed slave. Noisy steel extension of my mind, flogged with my fingertips, thousands of hours traveled on my thighs while oblivious to miles of Ohio, Oregon, Virginia, North Carolina scenery. I beat you to death. In return, you gave me a college degree, a 20-year career, letters home, letters of goodbye, words of a love.
Oh, that was excellent. What was that called again, Mark? Not the poem I thought you were going to put up, so I didn't have it on screen. What was it called?
Smith Corona Requiem.
Ah, that's a great title. Yeah, excellent poem. Thanks so much for sharing. I'm glad you could from the car. I think that might be the first caller from a moving car. We've had sitting cars, but not a moving car before.
Y'all could hear it.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll be back, and thank you, Mr. Green, for explaining me how the technology today works, as in getting on Zoom.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. Yeah. Anytime. Hope you can join us again.
Sure.
There's Mark Freiberg with a great poem. And let's go next to River Adams, another first-time caller. Hey, River. Are you there?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. It's my first time listening, but I've been a big admirer for a while of the printed magazine, so I thought I'd check out the podcast. And I'm really, really excited by this conversation. I think NFTs are a really interesting way to go with this. So I'm really thankful for everybody who's been able to speak on that.
I definitely think so too. And it is something. It takes a little while to get used to, but once you do, I think there are just a lot of possibilities. Yeah.
So I wanted to share a poem that I wrote about the Colosseum as well, because this is the first time that a news story has made me angry. At the same time, it made me want to write a love letter.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought that was really, yeah. This is called An Open Letter to a Tourist in Love, which was also inspired by a line that Vincent van Gogh wrote in a letter to his brother, where he says, like, love always causes trouble, but in its favor, it energizes. And I thought this was a great example. You carved the names of you and your girl into the concrete, a stubborn rose, smiling through confrontation outside the Colosseum. You held your keys inside your fist like a woman walking scared, while she stood watch in a spotted sundress, a pantheress, safe from a worse fate inside the ancient walls. The world wants to punish you, and I want to understand. Maybe you hadn't known love before. Maybe the love that came before wasn't worth the dedication. An inscription like the gold plate of a gladiator's pendant, swinging from his neck while he fights for his life, and the world roots against him. Are you pleased with the reaction? Are you terrified? Do you feel a little like a child who drew on the walls with crayon? You are not the first man to be selfish with a monument, generous with his love's name and time, forging her into forever. A man wrote his daughter's initials on the moon, and I wonder if there are nights when she forgets, when the moonlight streams through her window in the shape of her father's breath and she doesn't hear it, closes the curtains and tries to fall asleep. If it was me, I would be up all night. If I was yours, I would tell the story to anyone who'd listen. Maybe we all have ruined a ruin with what has made us better. Sometimes we love just to see what we can get away with. Someday a man who hasn't been born will arrive with love he hasn't yet found, and they will trace your names like a text they will translate with their bodies later. Love always causes trouble. This is known by every man who has ever made something, even if all he made was a mess. But what is there to make besides a mess? What are you doing in a city that is eternal, if not trying your best to outlive it?
Oh, that's a great reaction to that
Thank
news
you.
story. Yeah, thanks so much, River. I love that line where it was, maybe we all have ruined a ruin with what has made us better. That's just great. Such a great mixed emotions in that reaction to that poem. Really wonderful, wonderful line. Thanks for
Thank you
sharing.
for letting me share.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That was River Adams with Open Letter to a Tourist in Love. And last but not least, well, we have some more poets we've already been on, but for the poets who haven't been on yet, the last one here is Audrey Friedman. Hey, Audrey.
Hi, Tim.
How are you doing today?
Good. Very good. I have a prompt poem today.
Mm-hmm.
This is Ode to a Pomegranate.
Okay, great. Well, we know what this is about. That's the nice thing about odes, I guess, right?
Oh, yeah. What it's about is not always what it's about.
Exactly.
So, the poems have surprises. Ode to a Pomegranate. Oh, a womb bursting with seed, suspended in such stunning succulence. You are the motherlode, a sack full of exactly 840 possibilities. Persephone could avoid your siren call no more than Eve, and broke through the crown of your red rind to bare your membranes, suck your watery pulp from its sac, to crunch your countless secrets between her teeth.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, great extended metaphor there too, Audrey. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you.
All right, that was Audrey Friedman with Ode to a Pomegranate. And moving right along, let's go back to George Pastana, Odd Writings. He had something else he wanted to share, and the lines are open. George, what is it you want to share with us?
Thanks, Tim. I sent a link. I don't know if you got it. If it's visible, it's Myrrh by Locomotive.
Mm-hmm. Let me find it. Here's a link. Okay. Yeah, here we go. It's Murder by Locomotive. Yeah. So this is another one of the Palindrome poems. So
it's another goofy one. So make of it what you will. Just gotta. I'll just put it at that. So I'll go ahead and read it.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. Murder by Locomotive. Dark, the outside trains the eyes detective, visiting the rising sun, comforting somewhat the collapsed stars as children their cherished dinosaurs, plays the distracting role. Leading as following bloomers, billowing Cecilias, above the fray, growing blindly. Miscalculations, stony as planets, puncture the order eternal, and sublime justices suspect criminals subliminal. Prosecution and defense both move at words are untrustworthy vehicles, shrieking bloody murder. Of evidences, only the truly material matter. Is this rule the fixed stars directing? Answers the detective. Self-deceptive the promises, virtuous the compromising. Duty of dereliction engineers corrupt conduct. Intent Lucifers whisper clues, convincing lunatics to cleave shadows as moons following departed. Those of vision tunnel inside the light, the inside tunnel vision of those departed, following moons as shadows cleave to lunatics. Convincing clues whisper Lucifer's intent, conduct corrupt engineers. Dereliction of duty, compromising the virtuous, promises the self-deceptive detective the answers. Directing stars fixed the rule. This is matter material, truly the only evidences of murder, bloody shrieking vehicles. Untrustworthy are words that move both defense and prosecution, subliminal criminals. Suspect justices, sublime and eternal, order the puncture. Planets as stony miscalculations, blindly growing, fray the above Cecilias, billowing bloomers. Following his leading role, distracting the plays. Dinosaurs cherish their children, as stars collapse to the somewhat comforting sun. Rising, the visiting detective eyes the trains outside the dark.
Very interesting. That was Murder by Locomotive. Another palindrome poem, a word unit palindrome by George Pastana / Odd Writings. And George, what is this this website? This is frogpoet.github.io. Is that what is that?
That's basically so I have a GitHub account, which is GitHub is used by a lot of software developers, and they give you a free static web page for you to describe your projects. And so I realized this was like a free way, a sneaky way of me getting like free web hosting. so that's where I put my blogs. I just put it there on my GitHub page. Frog Poet was my handle way back in college years and years ago. And so before I came up with the word odd writings, I had Frog Poet. So I'm reusing this old GitHub account.
Yeah, well, very cool. Very interesting to think about that process you talked about earlier in action for the way that meaning comes out of the complexity of the puzzle you're putting together. Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, George.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And let's go to Johnny Dean Mann again. Johnny, did you have something else you wanted to share?
Hey, Tim. Yeah, I can happily share another one. I don't have a prompt one or anything like that, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But
No,
I do have
definitely
another NFT poem, which is on the theme, I guess. So
it did. Can I pull it up? Did you send it to me? Let's see.
I didn't know, but is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
If
if you just want to read it, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, fine. Well, it's a slightly unusual one. This is a generative poem that I did a couple of years ago in 2021 on a platform called FX Hash, which is for generative artworks. So this is like a poem system that I worked on with a coder. And just from the description to it, I call it a bespoke literary chance machine. It's crafted from a matrix of ranked options, and the style and tone of the generative output creates the title as well. So we've got a sort of generative title. So the algorithm that drives the poem is what they call an evolving feature map. So each word has a series of features. When it gets selected randomly, it contributes to the following words, so it creates a sort of thematic tone.
Interesting.
They're very short. It's split into 4, and I'll just give you a couple of examples of this, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is called the Managed Miles, the project. So the first one is number 12 of 300 and something. This one is called The Cold Strange. The way the fall pulls its own heat is like me. The way it blends and sallies, all the sounds froze above the view, taking lives as you pause. And then another one, this one is called The Reverent Breeze. The way the million lurches its own mole is like us, the way it floats and clips. All the sounds froze along the slope, calling lawns as you try. So you can see there are certain similarities that maybe pop up as you listen to them, but the chance of 2 transactions generating the same poem from this system is about 1 in 450,000, I think. So you get little bits come up that repeat, but yeah, everyone is original.
Yeah, that's very interesting. There's so many different ways to write a poem, and you know, the poets are interested in the NFT space tend to be interested in all the different ways too, and so very cool example of that. Thanks for sharing that, Johnny. And we will close out like we began with Katie Dozier. Hey, Katie.
Hello again. I'm still here.
You are still here. I was wondering if you had to get out to run, but you don't.
No.
So you have an ode, I believe.
I have a prompt poem, but I think I might actually read one that I think is more fitting to the closing out of the NFT Poets one here, which I also wanted to say because you went back and forth between people. I think we didn't really get to thank you as a group for deciding to do this tribute issue, but I know that everybody is super grateful. And it's really impressive that you saw the potential of our space when a lot of editors and publishers, I think, would be like, NFTs, I don't need no NFTs. And instead you were open to the conversation. So we all really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for saying that. You know, I'm always trying to, find new stuff. So even if it was weird and didn't work what you were doing, it's still going to be something worth interesting and checking out. But I do think the odds are pretty good of it being the future of how we share writing. So it's great to be early adopter. So thanks for getting me on board.
Thanks. Definitely weird, but also the future of everything as things tend to go.
Yeah, I think so. So can I pull up? Is there a way I can pull up what you want to read? Did you send it?
Oh, sorry, I forgot about that. Even though I'm on
you of all people.
like every week, like there is no excuse for that. Okay, well, I could.
Is it in your chat book?
It is in my chat book. Which you have in
okay, hang on 1 second.
room.
I'll go get it and put on the webcam. It's in the other room.
All right, I'll just talk until you stop.
Talk until I do. And what page is it on?
It's on page 22.
Okay, so tell people about it while I do that.
Okay, so This is the physical version of the collectible chapbook that I did. So what I decided to do was first mint this as a collectible chapbook, which I'm hoping other people copy that term because I think it's very appropriate. And then it's with Alexandria Labs, and the mastermind behind that, I think by and large being Amelie Lasker, who was amazing. And so I minted that as a collection where each particular NFT is a different one because the cover is different for every single iteration of that limited edition collectible chapbook, which makes it a non-fungible token. And in contrast to this, which is very fungible, very replicable, and just a physical traditional chapbook, but it exists in its more collectible form as an NFT. So,
okay, so which poem
the
are you
one
reading?
that I'm going to read Cake for Food Matthew, because this came up earlier in this, talking about this. So this was a party and a partial poetry reading that the Verse did in part at this party that was way cooler than I am, thrown by Food Matthew, that was like an NFT centric and in like a super hip art gallery where I felt overwhelmed by coolness as I'm a dork. So this is called Cake for Food Matthew, who is an NFT artist. All along the party walls, pictures of a pop art man wearing masks made of food, as if Andy Warhol had done a self-portrait in his soup. Toothpicked by his mouth, a jackfruit, ears made elfin by half pineapples, hot dog buns snug between binder clips, beside the cheeks of dripping ketchup and mustard. And now this, an ice cream cake held fast to his face. A metal scoop in one hand, a plastic spatula in his right. I wiggled the piece in the corner, afraid it would fall. A frosted cloud of sprinkles could have been flung onto the wall, but with my fudge square safe atop a paper plate, Food Matthew's arms extended upwards to offer more. At first I thought it only tasted like a chocolate start, but the second bite still lingers now, an unmasked metaphor for every piece of art.
So this is definitely the strangest party I've been to, and now I've been to haiku poetry parties too. But Food Matthew is I'll put up one of these. This is the kind of thing he does. He started doing the pandemic, and he puts food on his face and calls it art, which is interesting. You know, it's strange, but we're still talking about it like 6 months later, or however long it's been. I guess it's only been 3 months, but we're still talking about it. And it's just interesting. The joy and strangeness of that was definitely interesting. Thanks for sharing that poem, Katie.
Oh, thanks so much for doing this episode, and I loved hearing everybody's poems, and it was a really fun afternoon, so thank you.
It was, yeah, thanks so much. So that's going to close out the show. Let's do the Saiku really quickly. And the Saiku this week, if I can pull up, we have a lot of things up this time. The Saiku was based on this article out of the University of Cambridge. I have to accept the cookies, and they're very complicated because it's the UK. But anyway, the University of Cambridge is here, and they are did this research, this paper right here, reading for pleasure in early childhood linked to better cognitive performance and mental well-being in adolescence, which, you know, reading it, I just kind of actually thought it was a ridiculous study because, you know, kids who have a better job of reading and have stability and stuff become better in life. It doesn't mean that reading causes that. You know, it's just, you know, causation, correlation, etc. You know, I don't know what they're thinking, but it did make me think about reading. I, of course, read to my kids constantly when they were young, and I like to think that it mattered, even though, you know, likely they were just geniuses to start with, because that's just, you know, it's just how the world that the hand you're dealt with. But anyway, this is my little Saiku. It's a monoku. And here it is. After years just saying goodnight, moon. After years just saying goodnight, moon. That is our Saiku for the week, and that is the show for the week. Thanks, everyone, once again for being here with us and learning about NFTs. If you're familiar with it, hope you expanded your knowledge. If it's new to you, hope you understand kind of and get a sense and maybe more curiosity and see what's all about. Of course, you can read our interview with Sasha Stiles in Rattle number 80 or check out all those examples and author statements in that issue. You can also see we're going to have an episode with Sasha Stiles and with Ana Maria Caballero coming up later at the end of this month. But next week's guest on the Rattlecast, well, let me do the prompt first before I reveal next week's guest. The prompt for next week, kind of inspired by NFT Poets, and I'm not sure how this is going to work, but it's very open-ended. The prompt for next week is write a mixed media poem of some kind. Use art or sound or some other medium combined with your poem. Pretty simple, but a lot of options. We'll see what you do. That is next week's prompt. Make a mixed media poem of some kind. And next week's guest in the Rattlecast is going to be Virgil Suarez. And we've published Virgil several times going back, way back. Virgil is most recently the author of American Chernobyl. And it's a self-published book. Even though it's a beautiful book, he's an artist as well. And look at that beautiful cover. And so we're going to talk about self-publishing too. So sort of alternative publishing is a bit of a theme this month, although an accidental theme. But that's Virgil Suarez, a down in Florida-based poet. I know he rides motorcycles, and his newest book is American Chernobyl. So we're checking him out. Rattlecast number 201. Monday, back to the regular time, July 10th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you then. Hope you have a great week in the meantime, and I will talk to you later. Goodbye.